This happened back when I was in college. Spring break had just ended, and I was driving from my parents' house back to my college dorm. The drive itself was about 3 hours. There were a few small towns on the way, but other than that, it was pretty much just endless fields. I started my drive late, around 10:30 p.m. I was still making my way out of the town my parents lived in when I saw a hitchhiker walking on the side of the road. He was a tall, skinny guy carrying a duffel bag. As I got closer, he stuck out his thumb. I honestly felt really bad for the guy, and seeing as he was walking in the same direction I was going, I rolled down my window and asked if he wanted a ride. He named a nearby town and asked if I was going in that direction. I was, so I told him yes and unlocked the door. He got in the front seat, and I realized right away that he was a lot older than I thought, like, at least in his 40s. He kept to himself for a good part of the ride, which I actually didn't mind. I had the radio on, so it wasn't just awkward silence or anything. It wasn't until around 20 minutes into the drive with the guy that I started to think I made a mistake. The guy started clutching his stomach while groaning and complaining that he didn't feel well. He pretty much just hunched himself in the passenger seat, swaying back and forth. I told him to feel free to open up his window for some fresh air, but he never ended up doing it. To say I felt uncomfortable would be an understatement. Like, don't get me wrong, I understand if the dude wasn't feeling well, but here I am driving while just next to me is this guy groaning and swaying back and forth. There weren't really any towns or rest areas nearby. I didn't want to just tell the guy to get out and completely strand him in the middle of nowhere, so I kind of just sat there, trying to focus on the radio. This went on for another 15 minutes when the guy said, "Dude, I really don't feel good. Can you take the third next exit?" This caught me off guard. Not the part about wanting to stop, I was more so expecting him to say that at some point, but the part about the exit. The guy specifically said, "the third next exit." I remember those being his exact words. In the moment, I obviously thought it was weird. If I myself were sick, I would be much quicker to want to just pull onto the side of the road or at least take the very next exit. I asked the guy if he just wanted me to pull to the side of the road real quick, but he sternly told me no. This should have been a clear red flag, but I ultimately reasoned that the specific exit he wanted me to take must have had a rest area I was unaware of, so I agreed. A few minutes later, I took the exit, but absolutely nowhere in sight was any kind of rest area. I started pulling to the side of the road when the guy said, "No, keep going. We should go down a bit further." Again, this should have been a red flag I picked up on, but I did what he said. Eventually, he told me to stop. He got out and, within seconds, disappeared into the darkness. I waited for the guy to come back for a few minutes when I saw 5 hooded figures walking towards my vehicle, only revealed by the light of my headlights. They were clearly carrying weapons and now charging towards my vehicle. I threw the car in drive and started darting in the other direction, but they actually started shooting at me. From what I recall, 5 gunshots were fired, 2 of which hit the back of my car. Even still, I was able to get out of there. I didn't stop the rest of the way back. I did call the police and report it, but I never got any follow-up. When I made it back to my dorm, I found the bullet holes in the back of my car. I think it's worth noting that one of them was only a couple of inches from my tire, which makes me think whoever was shooting was aiming for the tires, but I'll never be able to know for sure. I don't fully know the motives of that hitchhiker that night, but at least to me, it's obvious he intentionally lured me into that specific spot, which, might I remind you, was nowhere near any type of civilization. I have since never picked up another hitchhiker. This happened multiple years back when I was around the age of 12. I was an only child, and back then, my family only had one car, which my dad would usually take to work each weekday. This meant any time my mom had to go somewhere while he was at work, she would either have to walk or hitchhike. Now, it should be mentioned that back then, hitchhiking was a lot more socially acceptable. Plus, at the time, we lived in a decently small town where, for the most part, everyone knew everyone. From what I can recall, this took place on a Thursday. My dad had dropped off my mom and me at the grocery store on his way to work. This, of course, meant we would have to find a ride back home. Though we'd done this many times before and never had any issues, only a couple of minutes into our walk back home, a driver pulled up next to us, willing to give us a ride. It was some guy in a white pickup truck who we had never seen before. He told us to get in the back, and we did. My mom started giving him directions to our home from the highway, but it honestly looked like the guy was just ignoring her. When we came to our exit, this was confirmed as he straight up drove right past it. The guy then went on to explain how he had to make a quick detour first. This was extremely unnerving, but after a while, we came up to a farm. The driver took out the keys, told us to wait in the car, and disappeared. My mom clearly didn't know what to do. I mean, we couldn't just leave. We were in an unfamiliar area in the middle of nowhere. A few minutes later, the driver came back, but now with a second guy. The guy looked at us and started flipping out, screaming at the driver. Now, I'm not sure if this is exactly what was said, but this is what I can remember. The guy screamed at the driver that he shouldn't have brought someone with a child and that there's no way anything can happen now. From what I recall, more things along those lines were said, but I can't remember exactly. The driver then got back in the truck and apologized to us. My mom sternly told the man to take us back to where he had picked us up. She technically hadn't given him our address yet and, for obvious reasons, now did not want that information known. The drive back was done in complete silence. Looking back, my mom and I both agreed that the purpose of that stop was not as innocent as a simple detour. We honestly see ourselves as lucky for making it out of that situation. We lived in that town for 5 years after that and never once saw those two guys again. This took place in November of 2005. Each year, my job would give us 10 vacation days. Seeing as I hadn't yet used any this year, I decided to take a week off to visit different states around the US. To get around, for the most part, I would actually hitchhike, which is something I've done multiple times in the past. Despite all the horrible recognition it gets nowadays, I actually really enjoy doing it. I've met a lot of people through hitchhiking that I still call friends to this day. Anyway, it was around 2:30 p.m. I was walking down the road giving the usual thumbs-up signal hitchhikers typically give. It had been a while since my last ride, and I'll be the first to admit I was getting a little desperate. Eventually, a red pickup truck pulled up next to me. Inside were two men, my best guess is they were in their 40 years old. One of them asked me where I was going, to which I responded. They both looked at each other for a second, then back at me, and signaled me to get in. They seemed normal enough, so I tossed my bag in the back, got in, and shut the door. But I quickly realized the whole floor of the vehicle was completely covered in different types of bullets. Before I had time to even rethink my decision, we were already going 60 down the highway. I tried to engage in some small talk to ease the tension, and it actually sort of worked. But somehow, the topic landed on how one of the guys had just gotten out of prison for aggravated assault. A disturbingly short amount of time later, they started asking me how much money I had. This is when I started to realize I could be in some serious danger. Now, I had been hitchhiking for a couple of days by that point. I didn't look the best, so I tried to play it off that I was homeless and had no money whatsoever. This response was met with complete silence. For the next 30 minutes or so, not a single word was said, though multiple times I would catch the driver looking up at me through the rearview mirror. I honestly just tried to ignore it, something I regret doing to this day. Fast forward 20 minutes, and to my horror, the driver turned off the highway and started down some unpopulated dirt road. I instantly shot up and said, dude, where are we going? After 15 seconds of no response while the car was still driving, I grabbed my bag, unlocked the door, and dove out of the car. Instantly, I looked up to see the red pickup slam on its brakes, shortly after followed by the reverse lights turning on. I cannot explain to you how fast I got up and ran into a nearby cornfield. I ran for 5 minutes when I swear I could hear gunshots behind me. They were clearly distant, but still, I ran for another 5 minutes until I reached the sign for the main highway. I then called the police, explained the situation in my current location, and waited in the cornfield until an officer arrived. I was then driven to the nearest police station, where I filed a police report. Though in terms of descriptions, there wasn't really much I had to give other than 2 men inside a red pickup truck. I hadn't gotten the license plate number, and I didn't even really see the full faces of the guys or even remember them. The whole situation was no doubt the scariest thing I've ever experienced. I don't completely know what those guys had planned, but I truly believe I could have lost my life that day. While I still hitchhike occasionally, I am now far more cautious in the cars I get into. It was a rainy night and I was driving home from my shift at the late-night diner I work at. It was a quiet shift at work. I had a weird amount of energy still, so I knew I was going to have to pop a melatonin when I got home. I was driving my usual route, a scenic road during the day but majorly dark at night, lacking many light posts. There are occasional little parking lots with cute little strips of stores or family-owned restaurants and shops, and then just stretches of nothingness. And by nothingness, I mean forest. I was passing one of the aforementioned parking lots of a well-known deli, and under a light post was a woman standing out in the rain with her arm held out. She was waving me down. I slowed as I realized it was a slightly older woman who appeared to be in her 50s, maybe. This woman was really tall, like 5 feet 11 inches or 6 feet, but very skinny. I lowered my window and yelled, "Do you need a ride?" She came over to the front door and opened it, chanting how much of a hero I am. I asked where she was heading, and she said just up the road to town. She was soaking wet, getting my car all wet, but I like to think of myself as a good person and I couldn't, in good conscience, leave another woman out there in the cold rain. However, picking up a random man on the other hand would be a different story. The woman seemed sweet, but I noticed as I looked at her while talking to her that she was missing a few teeth, very, very off-putting. I had to now wonder if she were homeless. She didn't smell or look like a homeless person, though, but the rain soaking her and her clothes could have been masking any scent temporarily. Plus, her hair was so wet that what may have usually been scraggly undone hair could now have been weighted down and straightened by the water. Either way, the woman was smiling the whole time and didn't seem like a threat. We pulled up to an intersection with a gas station on one corner. I pulled in next to a pump, might as well fill up. I asked her if she wanted anything from inside. I was really doing my good deed for the week. She said, "No thanks, honey, so I went inside to pay the attendant for gas and some spiked seltzers since tomorrow was the weekend. When I got back to my car, the woman was gone. I looked around the gas station lot real quick, but it was tiny. She was gone. She must have run off somewhere. I felt slightly bad, feeling like she was some lost helpless woman, but part of me also felt slightly relieved. I filled up the tank of my SUV and was on my way home. When I got back to the house, I went straight inside my apartment, which is the first level of a two-family house. There's a tenant upstairs and me. The front door into the foyer was usually left unlocked, then the two doors leading to each apartment were locked. I let myself in out of the rain and into my apartment. I set the seltzers down on the counter. I wasn't that tired yet, so I took a melatonin and tried to go to bed. Even with the melatonin, though, I was having a hard time sleeping that night. My mind was kind of going wild with thoughts, a lot of thinking about that woman I picked up earlier and what happened to her. At certain points, I heard slight sounds from outside of my bedroom, but I dismissed them as sounds from the upstairs tenant. Boy, do I wish I had been more suspicious before falling asleep. I woke up in my dark bedroom, something that usually would never happen when I take a melatonin. I usually sleep like a baby through the night. I sat up, feeling drowsy and really thirsty too. I reached over the table next to my bed for my water, and then I saw and heard something across the room from me. I saw someone crouched in the corner of my bedroom behind a clothing dresser, with their legs folded. I had to be hallucinating it. I shook my head violently and made weird noises. I even slapped myself in the face, and now whoever was in the corner stood up and walked out of the room. I didn't scream, I didn't say a word. I sat in my bed in literal shock. The part that had me questioning my sanity for a bit after the figure was gone was that there wasn't a single sound from outside the room after this, no footsteps, not the sound of a door closing. I grabbed my phone and called my dad. He picked up, confused why I was calling so late. I told him what I just saw, and he said, "Carter, you probably just had a night terror." I stayed on the phone with him as I was continuing to become more awake. I left my room and turned on the lights to the living room outside. It was a small space, there was no one in there. I looked around the entire space and could confirm no one was there. I started to believe that maybe I did just hallucinate it, but still, I slept with the bedroom door locked that night. When I woke up in the morning, I drank some coffee and got dressed for the gym. I went to open the door to the foyer and realized it was already unlocked. My heart sank. Last night, what I saw, was it real? I did another look around the apartment, confirming no one was inside. I went out to my car and opened the back door to put my gym bag in the back seat, and that's when I noticed the damp yellow-brownish stains all over the floor in the back, and my blanket that I always had back there was gone. I wanted to cry or scream. I figured it out. That woman snuck into the back seat last night when I was in the gas station. She either somehow unlocked the door to my apartment, or I mistakenly left it unlocked. I called my dad again, frantically asking him what to do. He said, check and make sure nothing was stolen, and if nothing was, then calling the police really wouldn't do anything. I checked the house and didn't find anything to be missing, just my blanket from the car. I skipped the gym that day. In fact, I stayed bottled up in my apartment for a while after that. I was just genuinely disturbed. I didn't want to live there for much longer after that, and so after that month, I found a new place to live. This happened a few months ago, and I don't know why I agreed, but I decided to go with my friend Elias to a house party he was attending during our first year of high school, even though I wasn't even invited. Elias was able to pull some strings, and I accepted the invitation knowing that I wouldn't be able to drive. I made the choice to go with Elias. When we arrived at the home late at night, Elias told me to leave my phone in the car. He explained that maybe I could lose it or someone I don't know could try and take it from me while I'm not looking. At first, I was confused. I simply nodded, and we got out of the car. I went with Elias into the home's backyard where the party was taking place. I glanced around the backyard and saw people engaging in various activities such as smoking, drinking, and possibly even doing drugs in small groups. Elias had encouraged me to go mingle and say hello to a few people. After a few hours, I realized I had had way too much to drink because my vision was completely foggy. After getting closer to the house, I leaned against the wall to support myself. As I did so, I noticed the time on my watch indicated that it was either midnight or 1:30 in the morning. I knew it was time to leave, so I set out to find Elias. Despite my overwhelming need to collapse, I scanned the yard for him, but I was unable to locate him or see him. When I asked a few others if they'd seen Elias, they all said they had not. I decided to call Henry to find out where he was, so I reached inside my pocket to feel for my phone, but it wasn't there. I cursed myself in the back of my mind because I realized that I had left my phone in Elias's car. It had disappeared with him. I realized there was only one way to get home, which was walking. I remembered my house wasn't too far from this house, but the night was chilly because it was fall. I thought about just asking someone else to take me home, but I didn't know anyone else who could help, so I stuck with my idea of walking home in the darkness by myself. I then got to the road and started stumbling down the street. I knew I had too many drinks because I felt lightheaded and dizzy. A few minutes later, I made it to the main area of the street and kept walking. I lazily started thinking about a bunch of different things, like why did Elias decide to leave me alone at the party, or why I decided to listen to Elias's idiotic idea of leaving my phone in his car so I couldn't call him or anyone else. I started cursing myself for being so careless with my drinking and even getting drunk when I knew I shouldn't have done that. I stopped walking on the side of the road because I was getting tired and crossed my arms over my chest tightly to keep myself warm. Then I remembered something I could do, which was hitchhiking. I held out my arm and stuck out my thumb, hoping someone could see me. I watched as a couple of cars drove past me. They wouldn't stop. As minutes ticked by, I started feeling uneasy, thinking I would have to start walking again. It was past 1 o'clock in the morning, and there were a few cars driving past me, but no one was stopping because they either didn't notice me or didn't care. I hesitated and thought about walking home again, but I realized that in my drunken state, it would be too daunting. I was still holding out my thumb when a gray truck pulled up and stopped in front of me. I smiled as I stumbled towards the vehicle. The window rolled down, and an older-looking man with a beard asked me if I needed a ride. I told him yes, and then told him where my house was before getting into the truck, feeling grateful for the ride. As we started driving down the road, the man began trying to make small talk with me, asking what happened to me. However, I was too disoriented to have an actual conversation with him, and the only things I could manage to say were low mumbling or just murmurs and groans. As we turned the corner onto my street away from the party, I started feeling uneasy for some reason. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was strange about this man. Suddenly, we drove past my house, and I told the man that we had just driven past it. I felt my gut telling me to get out, but I couldn't because I was too drunk to move. I was about to tell the man to let me out before we got too far away from my house when suddenly the man turned to me, and I noticed he had a sinister look on his face. "You know you shouldn't be drunk while you're hitchhiking because you'd make a very easy target," the man said, smirking darkly. The man reached over and started rubbing my leg. I didn't know what he was trying to do, but I knew it probably wasn't anything good. But before he could do anything else to me, we both heard a loud siren behind the car, and then a flashing red and blue light flooded the night. I realized it was the police, and I jumped for joy inside. The man panicked and stopped, unlocking the doors, which allowed me to jump out of the car. I ran as fast as I could, and the police officer rushed over to me. I told him the entire story about what happened to me. Unfortunately, nothing illegal happened per se at that point. The police officer told me that he was looking for someone in a gray truck who had apparently stolen something from a store. I'm not sure if it was the man who picked me up or someone else, but I was just glad the police officer stopped the car. A cop gave me a ride home, and I decided from then on I wouldn't get so drunk that I couldn't think straight. I now know the importance of being responsible and staying aware of my surroundings, even when having a good time. I was still in college when this happened. I went to a big party school in upstate New York. I wasn't in a sorority, but I attended a lot of the frat parties still. I had a heavy drinking phase in college, unfortunately, but I guess it's good that I got it out of my system. There was an upcoming frat party that my friends Verity and Ellie wanted to go to. I was not one to ever say no to a party unless I was already deathly hungover, and even then, I'd sometimes be known to still go out. I was living in a house off campus with 3 other girls. We were not a sorority house or team house or anything like that, just 4 friends renting a house together. I believe it was a Adam Sandler party that we were going to. The house was about 20 minutes away from campus. We pre-gamed pretty heavily at our house and then called an Uber, which we all split. On the Uber ride there, we pre-gamed some more, which was a recipe for disaster. By the time we showed up to the party, I was borderline blacked out. I barely remember the layout of that house. I'd never been to a frat party besides that night. It's weird, I have short spans of memory from that night. I vaguely remember the outside, that there were a bunch of frat guys standing out front of the house, and then I remember the DJ in the living room and the 2 beer pong tables in the kitchen. I was later told that I played beer pong with some random frat guy and ended up talking to him in a corner for a big chunk of the night. But after that, nobody knows where I went. I couldn't even tell you the last thing I remember before waking up sleeping on the grass on the side of the road. In a daze, my head was throbbing. I had to still be somewhat intoxicated. It was pitch black outside. I was laying by a bunch of trees, like a wooded area apart from the university. There wasn't much up there besides woods and the occasional little town. There were a couple of light posts further down the road, so I wasn't just laying in complete darkness. I patted down my pockets looking for my phone and had a meltdown when I realized my pockets were empty. I was also missing my crossbody bag. I had absolutely nothing on me and started to freak out. I couldn't even call for help, let alone check the time or where I was. I looked around the immediate area by where I was sleeping, nothing. My white shirt was stained with dirt, but that was the least of my worries. I started walking down the road closer to the light posts and began to realize there were no buildings in sight. I was on some completely random back road. I leaned on the light pole for a few minutes, wondering what to do. I decided I'd wait for someone to pass by and ask for help. It took a long time, though at least 20 minutes, before I noticed headlights down the road. I stepped out onto the road, waving my arms and jumping, trying to ensure I got their attention. The cars slowed to a stop on the side of the road. I approached the car, and the guy inside rolled down the window. Once he asked me if I was all right. I told him I was stranded without a phone and needed a ride home. He told me to get in, and I did, making sure to let him know how much I appreciated it. He, of course, asked me about my predicament, how I found myself stranded on the side of the road. I told him I was at a party, and the next thing I remembered was waking up on the side of the road. In hindsight, I should not have said any of that. I should have been as vague as possible and not let this guy know that I got completely trashed and was vulnerable. He asked why I didn't call for help, and I told him I lost my cell phone too. I looked back at him for a second, and this was the first time I really analyzed his features. He was about 40, not the best-looking guy, with a thin goatee and a big nose. I gave him my address to put into his house as he drove. He put the address in, and then I heard him say under his breath, "Okay, here we go." I asked how far away we were, and he said about 15 minutes. That sounded about right since the frat house was about 15 minutes from our house. I thought things would go smoothly. I'd get dropped off at the house where Ellie and Verity would be waiting for me with my belongings. But nothing can ever go that smoothly. The man spoke in a gentle voice basically the entire time. He was asking basic questions. At first, his soft voice was almost, in a weird way, off-putting, like why was he talking in an almost whisper in the car. We drove on and on for what seemed like over 15 minutes on the same road. I started to get concerned and asked him how much further we had. He didn't respond right away, so I said, "Sir," and he went, I repeated my question, and he said in his soft voice, "Not far." This wasn't right. Our house is in town, yet we were still on the same back road with nothing but trees everywhere. I started noticing in my peripheral vision that he would look at me multiple times, like he'd move his whole head to stare at me for a few seconds and then look back at the road. I was starting to feel sick. I asked him if he put the right address in, and he said yes. Then he asked, "What color underwear are you wearing?" as he put his hand on my knee and started rubbing it. I moved it away and told him in a desperate voice to please not hurt me. I just wanted to get home safe. He said, "Why would I hurt you?" After saying this, he pulled onto the grass on the side of the road and put the car in park. He was about to lean over towards me and do something, like put his arms around me, but I didn't let him. I opened the door and ran into the woods. Luckily, I was wearing my Air Forces, so I didn't have a hard time running in the woods. I ran only just enough to be out of sight from the car. When I could no longer see its headlights, I heard the man for the first time raising his voice. He yelled into the woods, "Where you at?" "I just want to." I put my hands over my mouth, not only to muffle my breathing but because of pure fear. I waited and waited until I heard a car door slam shut and the sound of a car speeding off. I waited a few more moments before walking back to the road, confirming he was gone. I felt truly helpless. I didn't want to run into that man again, but I also needed someone else to help me. I waited just at the edge of the woods for another car to come, and eventually, one did. I saw the headlights approaching from afar, but I waited until I was sure it was a different car before jumping out and waving my arms and yelling. The car came to a stop. It was another man, a little older. I sat in the back seat. This time, I was so shaken up that I hardly spoke apart from answering whatever questions about my predicament he asked. Thankfully, this man dropped me off at the house. It was like 4 a.m. at this point. My friends were still awake waiting for me. They had my phone and my bag. They were contemplating calling the police if I didn't come back by morning. No one had any clue who I left with or how I ended up on the side of the road. The boy I was with claims he wasn't the one who left with me. In fact, there's no solid proof that I even left with anyone, but that leaves no explanation for how I ended up sleeping on the side of the road. I cut back heavily on the drinking after this night and never want to be in a situation again where I have to hitchhike. Out of the dark forest, I was hitchhiking from Liège, Germany, to Paris. He was a French man, a somewhat dirty and unshaven driver, small and shabby. He agreed to give me a ride in his car, a ride with him to Paris where I needed to pick up. My paintings were from an exhibition I had there. It was October, I was 30 years old, and he seemed about the same age. He spoke broken English, I spoke no French at all. I really didn't have a clue who this guy was. The day was mild, sunny, and blue. It was a warm and comfortable French day, a great day to hitchhike. It was around 4:30 p.m. when I met him at a gas station somewhere in France. I hopped into his little old car, happy to have scored a ride. We drove off to Paris on the main highway. After some small talk, mainly about where I'm from, he reached over my lap and opened the glove compartment. He pulled out what looked like a bunch of passports. They were passports. He handed me all four. The first was a pretty girl who was his girlfriend and had died falling off the back of his motorcycle, he said. The second was a girlfriend who had died in a car crash. He told me the third girlfriend died from a brain tumor and the fourth fell off a horse. He said, "I'm such an unlucky man." I agreed he was unlucky. The uneasiness started then and only grew as the miles rolled on. He was in possession of 4 young women's passports. Soon after showing me the passports, the man said he wanted to take a shortcut to Paris. It wasn't really a question to me. Excellent, I thought, get me out of here ASAP. I assumed we would cut through some charming French villages on secondary roads, past houses and farms, but no. Instead, we turned off onto an implausible dirt road off the main highway. I thought. Not good, but I kept silent. Why we keep quiet is a mystery, perhaps because of our dumb manners. At first, the road was out in the open through a field. We rolled over the typically vivid green French hillside until we finally reached the oncoming heavy woods. The road narrowed. It grew instantly darker as we entered the forest. The interior of the forest was creepy. The woods looked like the perfect place to hide something. I still found the woods beautiful and dreadful. It was at this point that my French driver shouted in broken English, "I don't want to speak English anymore." This was definitely not a request. Then silence, uncomfortable silence in the darkening forest. I started to feel a small trickle of adrenaline in my body. My fight-or-flight instinct was warming up. Communication had now officially ended, just silence. I pondered this because I knew I would surely have questions as we would get deeper and deeper into the thickening woods. I knew, though, that I wouldn't ask anything. Nothing. It was now 5 p.m., and the sun was fading fast. The woods grew darker. The driver seemed so tense, and I could tell he was in deep thought. I noticed his lips moving almost imperceptibly. They were rigid, snake-like. I myself had moved my hand to the car door handle, a movement I'm sure could not have been missed. The car was slowing down. It did not say a word. Was I going to die now? Did he have a gun? All these questions ran through my head. My life was now surreal. This was not my plan. Maybe I communicated with my captor in some secret way. Maybe I gave off some kind of male pheromone perceptible only to men. Facing off, I possessed my own rage issues, and I was not going down without a fight. That I knew. There would be no begging or cries of mercy from me, not to this. I also had my own secret store of crazy. I was big and strong at that time, rode tough through my travels, and there's no substitute for my nothing to lose stare. That is all I gave him. Something very primitive transpired between us then. I think rather quickly, in a matter of seconds. It's a sort of inner calculus as to whether one can overcome, stop, or kill the other guy or not, and all its peripheral considerations, not the least blood, gore, strength, and alas, dying. I don't think these calculations are the same when a victim is small and scared, begging and weak. I think between those two uneven people, it just becomes bloodlust, power, panic, scratching, and doom. 5:12 p.m. The car was now moving really slow. I entered a very strange and new place in myself. I was transformed with very little preparation, transformed into a potential killer myself, maybe. My chauffeur could read my mind, or my body language, or sense my intent, or see my hand on his dirty door handle. It was the moment of truth, and then we suddenly started to speed up. Thank God. Out of those woods. Odd how these memories have come back to me as I write this. Some memories I'm not certain of. Like, did he say he had to hit one girlfriend with a shovel because she attacked him and would not be quiet and leave him in peace? Did he really explain the 2 backpacks on the back seat? Did I not hear that on purpose? Did I later imagine those words? Did I see more passports in his glove box than the 4 he pulled out? Why didn't I say, stop the car, after the passport show? The road began to widen, and we emerged out of the dark forest into the setting sun, dark red and orange in the sky. I could hear and then see the highway. Now I saw tiny houses across the highway. I had no idea where exactly I was. The Frenchman asked me if I wanted to spend the night at his house. We could eat dinner together. A quick film of his filthy torture chamber basement ran through my head. I politely said no. My first words spoken since the order not to speak English. I sincerely think that had I broken that command and blabbered something in the woods, my story might have had a different ending. It all came down to silence. I can be silent sometimes. One needs to be to contemplate the next move. Maybe one of the faces in the passports may not have been able to spring over her nature and started to talk or beg with fear. Would that have fed the killer's darkness as evil? Who really knows? I got out at the side of the highway, and with night settling in, I watched him drive away. I never went to the police because I didn't speak French, and I thought maybe my imagination was just too damn active. I yelled something into the night sky, just wondering what the hell had just happened. It was fully dark now. I was exhausted after that little adventure and soon fell asleep on the side of the highway. The next morning, I was worried about what the new day would bring. I looked at my hands, wondering if I was still alive. Jump ahead 20 years, and I'm teaching a German business student English in a cafe on a boulevard in Liege, Germany. For whatever reason, we discussed the topic of hitchhiking, and I tell him my story. My student promptly whips out his smartphone and Googles French serial killers. Then he shows me pictures. There he was. I was shown a photo of serial killer Patrice Allegre. It was him, all those years ago, me and him on that strange ride. I had never forgotten his face. At that time, in 1990, there was a reported serial killer leaving bodies of girls on the French roadsides and highways. He was in the midst of his killing hobby back then. I had heard about a killer on the loose. My French girlfriend told me to be careful hitchhiking. I've often wondered if the murdered women and other men may have been buried in those woods we passed through slowly. I now wish I had gone to the police and have since subsequently tried. He's in jail, and they're not interested. Maybe I could have helped stop more murders back then. That's heavy on my soul. Since then, I've felt the dark light in my body. Maybe the souls of the girls escaped with me, desperate to get out of the forest. This happened years ago when I was 20. Back then, I was good friends with a guy named Ethan, who I met in high school. Both of us grew up with a passion for the outdoors, and so we thought it'd be fun to go on a week-long backpacking trip in the California woods together. We've done this once before, and I really enjoyed it. I remember looking forward to it. The whole trip started off going well, but that only lasted till the second night. It was just starting to get dark, and Ethan and I were setting up our tents for the night when we began to hear the distant sound of leaves crunching under multiple pairs of footsteps. We were pretty deep in the forest, but running into other campers wasn't completely unheard of, just, I guess, a bit of a rare occurrence. Eventually, 3 guys came into view. They didn't really look like campers. They didn't have backpacks or anything. I thought it was kind of weird to be wandering around the forest this late, but I didn't think much of it. They gave us a somewhat friendly greeting, and we gave one back. They then asked us if we were camping for the night, which was obvious as we were in the process of setting up our tents with the rest of our stuff all laid out. We pointedly said yes and asked if that was a problem. We wanted to make sure we weren't on someone's private property or, just generally in a place we weren't supposed to be. They replied saying no and just kind of walked off. The whole encounter was odd, but Ethan didn't think so. He pointed out how they were most likely just hunters in the area, as all of them were armed, something I myself didn't notice. Got to a few hours later, and Ethan and I were now asleep in our respective tents. This was around the time I woke up to the sound of yelling, like multiple voices shouting in the distance. I yelled out to Ethan to see if he was awake. He was and was just as confused as I was. It was 2 a.m. when this happened. Our conversation was then interrupted by multiple gunshots. They honestly sounded like they were getting closer. I asked Ethan if he thought that whoever these people were just hunting. He responded, saying, "No, dude, there's no way they're hunting this late. I think we should go." My heart started to race, now realizing the reality of the situation we were in. We both unzipped our tents, grabbed only our bare necessities, and started hastily moving west. We moved for maybe half an hour before stopping. The yelling and gunshots were now barely audible, although they were persistent, continuing off and on up until sunrise. All night, we basically just sat there, listening to them, both wide awake from a mixture of fear and adrenaline. When the sun finally rose, we discussed what to do next. Ultimately, we decided we would wait until noon before heading back to our campsite. The plan was to then quickly pack up all of our stuff and make the trek back to our cars, cutting our trip 5 days short. Fast forward to noon, and we started cautiously heading back. When we arrived, the sight we were met with was nothing short of horrifying. Our campsite had been completely ransacked. Almost all of our stuff had been damaged. This is thousands of dollars in equipment we're talking about. But most disturbing were the bullet holes shot into our tents. You don't have to be that smart to conclude that these people had genuinely tried to kill us. Further supporting this theory is the fact that nothing was actually stolen from our campsite, it was all just damaged. As far as who did this, we don't know. The only people we can really pin as suspects are the 3 people that walked up to us as we were building our tents. But this begs the question, why? Why would they do this? The whole experience has left us with more questions than answers. Nothing about it makes much sense, but I know I myself just feel lucky to be alive. In the end, we quickly salvaged all the equipment we could and made the trek back to our cars. In 2014, a man named Blair and his wife Farah were spending a weekend together on Vancouver Island, which they had done many times before. The couple has a lot of experience on the island and just camping in general. Vancouver Island provides an optimal camping setting because of its mix of scenic beaches and dense forest. The couple had many successful camping trips on the island until something truly terrifying happened to them on their final outing on the island. Blair and Farah were far from any roads or civilization, enjoying the solitude. They set up camp on a beach, a good distance from anywhere, and kept a fire going. To get to the trail leaving the beach was 1 kilometer along the beach and 2 kilometers to the road through the forest. The couple had met another camper named Claude from New Zealand, who they ran into earlier that day on the beach. Claude was planning on sleeping in his van, which he parked back up on the road. The couple invited him down to the beach for a fire, and the 3 shared a bottle of wine, talking amongst themselves around the fire. This is where things started to get a little creepy. The sun was starting to go down by this point, and the trio kept hearing what sounded like female voices from behind them in the bushes dividing the beach from the forest. It wasn't too dark out yet, though, so it was still possible that they were just other hikers or campers nearby, or even a group who anchored offshore and the sound was just bouncing in a weird way. All 3 of them could agree that they were hearing female voices. On that note, it was getting late and a little dark, so Claude said goodbye and set out to hike back to his car before it was too dark. Blair and Farah stayed by their campsite and stoked the fire because Farah was starting to get creeped out by the voices, which continued on into the darkness. It sounded like 2 female voices speaking, but whatever that was being said was unintelligible. It sounded to the couple like the voices were not far beyond the tree line now. They stayed up very late tending to the fire, and only when the voices had finally stopped did they decide to put out the fire and go to sleep in the tent. Before doing so, the 2 had scanned the cove with a flashlight several times looking for boats that could have been the source of the talking, but there was nothing in sight. It was around 3 a.m. when they laid down, finally ready to catch some sleep, but about 15 minutes after they laid down, Blair and Farah heard footsteps in the area around their campsite, over by where the fire was. They came from the direction of the bushes toward the inland behind them, a direction that was not traversable by people. The couple lay there hoping it was just a bear or any animal because the only bears on the island are black bears, which usually are very timid around people. The footsteps went from the fire, then over to the tent, then back into the woods. 5 minutes later, the footsteps came back again to the fire, and now, clear as day, there were 2 female voices talking gibberish very loudly. Their communication did not resemble any languages known to Blair or Farah, and they seemed to be talking over each other, having what could barely be considered a conversation at full volume in the dead of night, very far away from civilization, without using lights to navigate through the dense brush relatively quietly in a direction that seemed impossible to traverse on foot. The 2 voices moved from the fire pit area over to the tent, still talking at a loud volume. They stood over the tent talking for a few seconds, then went completely dead silent. They went back into the woods to never be seen or heard again. Blair and Farah lay there completely frozen and afraid for a long time. They woke up around 11 a.m. the next day because of how late they fell asleep. They packed up first thing and never returned. The couple probably made the best decision to remain quiet in the tent, not drawing attention to themselves from whoever or whatever was outside. The following pictures you're about to see were taken by hikers Orly and Dante, who both live in Eagle Mountain, Utah, a small town south of Salt Lake City. For the past few years, they had been exploring forests in search of interesting things, and one day they found it. One day, Orly was hiking in Cedar Fort, just 5 miles south of Salt Lake City. While hiking, she found large amounts of animal bones and piles of junk people had dumped, but things started to get strange when she started coming across strange symbols and animal parts scattered throughout the forest, some of them in weird formations. On September 15th, she decided to bring her friend Dante along with her to show him in person the unusual things she was finding. This time, the two came across something even more disturbing. On the trail, there was a severed deer head and a pentagram surrounded by deer legs, which were not there the first time Orly walked the trail. The sun was going down, and after getting their pictures, they agreed it was time to head back to the car. But the more they walked, they realized they didn't recognize the path they were on. So, the two started looking around for anything that could refresh their memory of where they were. But as it got dark out, the two accepted that they were lost. With nothing but their phone flashlights to navigate, they started getting the feeling they were being watched. As they picked up their pace, the two started to hear the trees and bushes moving at least 20 feet to their right, made more concerning by the fact that there was no wind that night. The two started to panic and hurried onto a trail they found, hoping it would take them back to Orly's car. Just when things couldn't seem to get any worse, Orly and Dante heard a scream so deep and horrific that it sounded neither human nor animal. The two sprinted down the trail, Orly making a conscious effort not to look back, but Dante did. Dante claimed to see a large black figure on the trail behind them, too big to be a human. The two made it to the car by some stroke of luck, losing whatever was chasing them. So, they left the forest and went straight home. Orly has not returned since. I've owned and lived in the same house for 8 years. It's a normal family-sized home, which was relevant when I had roommates. But when they moved out and it just became me living here, I had nothing to do with the extra space. It was technically a 4-bedroom house, but I only used 2 of the bedrooms. One is my main bedroom and one is the game room. The other 2 rooms were on the far end of the upstairs hallway. One had a few storage boxes in it, and the other was completely empty. After getting out of work at 9 o'clock, I picked up Wendy's on the way home and pretty much went right to the game room. I was off tomorrow, so what better to do than game all night? I put my headphones on and loaded up COD, but before I had time to even load into a match, I thought I heard something that sounded like a knock at the front door. I took my headset off and listened, but not hearing anything and figuring they would have knocked again if there was someone there, I went back to my game. Probably a whole 2 hours went by, and then I heard it again. It sounded like either a knock or a door closing or something like that, but with my headphones on and with my room door closed, it was way too quiet for me to tell. I got up and opened the door, looking out into the hallway and waiting for that sound to come again. After a minute, though, I went downstairs and looked out the front door. Nobody was outside my house, and everything seemed normal. Having been hearing these sounds, though, I obviously made sure the door was locked before going back upstairs. To be a bit more cautious, I left my room door open this time, so if it happened again, maybe I'd hear it better. I put my headset back on and continued gaming. I played through a whole round, so like 20-ish minutes. As the game ended and I leaned back in my chair, a figure rushed past the open doorway, just off to the side of my view. I immediately threw my headphones off and jumped from my chair, horrified and unsure what to do. I just stared at the doorway. I didn't get the courage to finally move for several minutes. When I looked into the hallway, though, and eventually the rest of the house, nobody was there, but the front door was unlocked again. When police came and investigated, it was clear that the person had been hiding and very likely living in the empty room. I hadn't been in there for weeks or maybe even months, so all this time they could have been just on the other side of the wall from me, and I had no idea. It's really scary to think about, especially if I'd happened to confront him. There's no saying what he would have done. My friend Basil and I rent a house together. He's a pretty big partier, though, and often stays out really late or even sleeps over at others' places, so a lot of nights I have to myself. This was one of those nights where Basil was out at the club or something. So, having the night alone, I brought out a couple cans of beer to our front porch and sat on the swinging bench we had set up. It was nice weather out, and with it being nearly midnight, most people were sleeping, and the neighborhood was pretty quiet. After being out for a little less than an hour, a person came walking down the street in front of the houses. He looked like a large guy and had a sweatshirt on with a hood over his head, but something was off about the way he was walking. He was very stiff, like only his legs were moving, and his whole upper half wasn't. When he got up to the part of the road my house was in front of, he stopped and looked over at me. I waited a few seconds for him to say something, but he didn't say anything. He just stood there in the middle of the road, right in front of my house, and looked at me. "Hey buddy, you need something?" He stayed quiet for a moment, then started walking up my driveway. I stood up from the bench and yelled at him to leave, but once I realized he was getting pretty close, I hurried inside and locked the door behind me. I then watched out the peephole as the guy came right up to the door. He waited for another second before pulling out something from under his sweatshirt. It was hard to see from the small view I had, but it looked like maybe a hammer or crowbar or something. Once I saw that, I knew what was likely about to happen. I ran upstairs and locked myself in the bedroom, dialing 911 and trying to be quiet. I could hear the wood splintering off the door downstairs as I pleaded with the operator for help. Then there was a loud thud and silence. The broken door swaying on its hinges was the only sound. I waited anxiously, only assuming that I'd hear the guy's footsteps approaching the bedroom door at any second. But seconds turned to minutes until I heard a cop car pull into my driveway. I thought about running down to the officers, but the operator suddenly told me through the phone to stay where I was and wait for the cops to get to me. So, I sat back down. 30 seconds later, I heard one of the officers walking up the stairs, followed by them shouting and firing off a taser. The guy had been standing right outside the bedroom door, as if he was just waiting for me to open it. He was arrested and apparently was very drunk, but I have no clue who he was or why he did what he did. As far as the officers have told me, the guy wouldn't even say why he was walking down the road or what he was even doing there. All I know is if I had opened that door, it would have been the last thing I ever did. I'm an only child and grew up in a small town. My parents were hardworking and often struggled to pay the bills, so they usually worked a lot of overtime or even had multiple jobs. Because of this, I was left home alone pretty frequently. I was 13 at the time, and this night both my mom and dad were working closing shifts, so I was at home by myself after school until 10 or 11. To keep myself busy, I'd usually watch TV or go for walks in the woods behind our house. After getting home from school and having a snack, I went outside and started walking along my regular path while the sun was still out. It was a 2.5-mile trail through the woods that almost never had anyone else walking on it. Strangely though, about a mile into the walk, I saw a guy on the trail up ahead. He was sitting with his back against a tree, wearing a dark blue jacket and had a red baseball cap tilted downward, covering his eyes and most of his face. From the way he was slumped over, it almost looked like he was sleeping. So I continued walking, trying to quietly pass by him. As I got just a couple of feet away, though, he lifted his head and instantly locked eyes with me. His eyes were tired and red, and he had this disturbing frown like he was upset or something. As I passed by, he started standing up, and getting a strange feeling about him, I began walking faster, basically jogging the rest of the trail and back home. I didn't see him follow me, but I locked all the doors just in case. Again, I was only 13, and even though I was used to being home alone, I still got scared pretty easily. I stayed inside and checked the windows one last time before trying to distract myself by watching TV. Only a few minutes after turning it on, though, I heard a voice at the back door. I paused the TV and listened, hearing a man call out multiple times, repeating the word, "Hello." I stood up and looked down the main hallway. That same guy with the red cap and blue jacket was standing at the back door, almost pressing his face into it as he tried to look inside. I quickly went back around the corner, but he must have seen me because he immediately stopped calling out and instead started trying to force the door open. I just froze up in the middle of the living room, listening to the door jolt back and forth against the lock. After several attempts, though, he left. I called my parents, and they called the police, but he was never found. Having been followed home and them trying to break in, though, I can only imagine what they were trying to do to me. It took place back when I was in high school. I was, I believe, a junior during this time and loved to play video games. I had a good friend at school named Noah, who I would game with almost on a nightly basis. We would hang out all the time as well, and he lived just a few blocks over. On this night, we were playing video games online on our PlayStation 4s. I was at my house, and he was at his. We had headsets so we could talk to each other as we were on. I remember that after playing for a while, Noah said, "What was that?" It kind of came out of nowhere, and I assumed that he was just talking about the game. I asked him what and he didn't answer me at first. Then all of a sudden, he said, "What the," and it kind of abruptly went quiet. I heard some other noises but couldn't make them out. I didn't know what was going on. I asked Noah what he was doing, but he did not answer me. Everything was silent for a while. After, I sent Noah a Snapchat asking him what that was all about. I was really confused, but Noah did not immediately open it. So, I got curious and was kind of concerned. I decided to walk over to his place. Maybe he was playing a prank on me, but I felt like I should go ask him. We were such good friends, and it wasn't that weird for me to do that. So, I left my house at whatever time it was, probably like 10 p.m. It was dark out, and after walking a few blocks, I arrived at Noah's street. It was quiet, and we both lived in a pretty typical neighborhood for the most part. When I reached Noah's house, I wasn't sure if his parents were home or not because most of the lights in the house appeared to be off. I walked up to the front door and knocked on it. At first, there was no answer. It was very quiet. But a short time after knocking, I heard what sounded like somebody who may be in the backyard. After waiting a while, I knocked again. I couldn't see into the backyard from where I was. I continued to wait at the front door, wondering if I should investigate the noises I had heard in the back. Maybe Noah had gone outside, but I didn't really know why he would. Then finally, I heard someone walking towards the front door inside. The door then opened, and Noah was standing there. He looked very serious and told me to come inside quickly. I got in, and then he closed and locked the door. He said a man had been inside his house, and he was calling the police. He added that he thought the man just left. Noah went back and got his phone from his bedroom and dialed 911. He told me that his parents were gone, and he was home alone. We both waited for the police in his parents' room because it had a lock on it. Nobody else entered the house or was in it while we waited. The police got there shortly after and spoke to us. I guess what happened is when I was gaming with Noah, he heard a noise from behind his house. It sounded like the back door, which led to the kitchen, was opening. It must have been left unlocked or something because an unknown person did, in fact, enter. After hearing the footsteps, Noah ran to his closet to hide. He was able to hide but did not have his phone and couldn't call the police. Then I must have heard him running to his closet, and he said that he completely forgot about me on the headset. The headset was also not wireless, so he had to take it off to hide in his closet. While hiding, he heard the person walking around inside of his house. He hid all the way until I arrived at his place. When he heard the knock on the door, he said the man started walking around quickly and then left the house. I realized that I must have scared the guy off by knocking on the door. Noah was grateful to me for doing so. He then was able to leave, lock all the doors, get his phone to call the police, which was on the floor near his bed, and let me in the house. I don't know why the man entered the house or how he seemed to know that the door would be unlocked, but I'm really glad that I went over to Noah's. I work in the pro department of a home improvement company. I worked the closing shift with another cashier, who I'll call Aria. Aria's a really kind but quite timid cashier. She's also very pretty, so she has a lot of contractors hit on her. It's usually not that worrisome, though a few compliments, maybe a dinner invite, which she politely declined. I would probably ask her out as well if it wasn't for one detail: Aria does have a girlfriend. So being hit on by guys on a daily basis makes her rather uncomfortable. When we first met, I told her she ought to tell those guys about being gay, but she kept saying it wasn't any of their business, so she kept that part to herself. Aria has become my best friend, and having another cashier there with you keeps things from getting lonely. We even cover for each other's lunch breaks. One day, when I came back from lunch, Aria started telling me about this rather creepy guy who was flirting with her. She said she politely turned him down, saying she was with someone already, and while he didn't seem happy, he did leave. I shrugged it off as nothing more than the usual horny guy and laughed it off. But later that day, the man came back. Aria wasn't there, as she had left to help a customer find some lumber, so it was just me. He looked rather normal, probably handsome to most women, but he acted off. After looking around the area, I asked him if I could help him with anything. "I'm here to see Aria," he told me. I asked him how he knew her, and he said he had come in earlier and asked her out, to which she said yes, so he had come back in to pick her up. I told him she had left for the day, a usual lie everyone tells to cover for their friends. His smile went away as he started looking annoyed. He said he wanted to speak to Aria and ask her out again, which contradicted what he had just told me about accepting his previous invite. I told him he could not do that, which caused him to cross his arms and asked me why not. I'm not the best liar when it comes to making up excuses on the spot, however. I didn't want to tell him Aria was gay if she didn't want him to know it. So I just blurted out that Aria was my fiancée. His annoyed look went to confusion as he asked me how someone as pretty as she is could go out with someone like me. I'm not a Chris Evans or anything, but I don't think I'm that bad looking. I told him it didn't matter and that she and I were getting married in a couple of months, so he needed to back off. He gave me a death look but didn't say anything. After an awkward silence, he left. After Aria had gotten back, I told her what went down. She asked me to describe him, and after I told her what he looked like, she said that was the same guy who came in before. She was a bit creeped out by what went down but found the fiancé excuse rather funny. She even stated she'd rather be engaged to me than go out with him, which I'm guessing was a compliment. A couple of weeks went by, and we had all but forgotten about the man. At this point, one night after it had gotten dark, Aria and I were getting the trash together so we could close down the registers and go home. Just then, we heard a bang at the door, causing both of us to nearly jump out of our skins. It was the guy again. He had a wild look in his eyes as he kept his face pressed against the glass. "We're closed," I told him, but he insisted he needed to come in. Aria yelled again to tell him she's not interested and for him to go away and leave her alone. But he yelled that he's not here for her, he's here for me. He then says that if he can take out her husband, then she'd be all his. Based on that, he wanted to kill me. I told Aria to run to the manager's office and call the police, and I'd stay here and watch him. I won't lie though, I was pretty afraid to be in that tiny little area. If the guy was able to get in, he wasn't the biggest guy, but he could have had a weapon on him. Plus, the store doesn't allow us to have self-defense items on us, so I was on my own here. The guy then started ramming the sliding doors like he was crazy. The doors were rattling. I could have sworn they were going to come off their base. Just then, Aria came running back around the corner with a 2x4 in her hand, yelling that the cops were on their way. Finally, the man decided to leave. The closing manager met the officers when they came, and he took them to review the cameras. Thankfully, the man was caught and arrested, but Aria and I felt unsafe working there any longer. We're still friends and even attend the same college together, but we have separate jobs now while we pay our way through classes. I'm glad she was there to help me with the robe man, as I hate to imagine what he might have done to me, or worse, what he might have done to her. She says she's glad I was there for her as well, as having a guy around tends to make men like him less confident in what they might try. It was a wake-up call for me as to how dangerous it can be for some girls when an interested guy just doesn't want to take no for an answer. Up until about a year ago, I worked at a grocery chain. I was, and still am, a working college student. My availability was only 6 p.m. to closing, which in this case was midnight. It wasn't my favorite job. I dealt with a lot of annoying customers and coworkers, one of whom once broke into my locker and put a used tampon in the pocket of my apron, but that's a whole different story. My job was walking distance from where I lived, which made it really convenient since I didn't have a car. One Friday night, I was closing as usual with my supervisor, and we were running later than we usually did. My supervisor and I finally got the remaining customers out of the store, clocked out, and left. I left before my supervisor and began walking home. After a long, frustrating day of annoying customers, it felt great to just walk through the fresh winter air. I spent a few minutes shuffling through my phone's playlist to find a song to walk home to. I had made my way down the main road, careful not to slip on any of the ice. One thing that's really important to know about me is that I'm a very anxious person, and while it's definitely a problem most of the time, it does help make me constantly aware of my surroundings. That's when I saw an approaching car slowing down on the deserted main road, and I automatically went on high alert. It was a black car that came to a slow stop against the sidewalk I was on, about 10 feet behind me. I immediately clutched my phone in my hand and brought it out of my pocket. If there wasn't any ice covering the sidewalk and my feet didn't hurt, I probably would have run. Instead, I opted to try and pretend that I wasn't afraid, which I don't think worked because I picked up my pace after the car stopped. It was then that I heard a man's voice call out to me. "Hey, it's cold out here. You want a ride?" the man said. I kept walking away from him up the street, pretending I didn't hear him and just hoping he would go away. It didn't work. A few moments later, I heard the car tires crushing the ice on the road and then turned around to see what he was doing. He was now driving with the car in reverse. When he caught up to me, he had rolled down the passenger seat window some more. He was a black man, maybe in his mid to late 30s. He looked at me and I stopped, prompting him to stop his car as well. "Hey, let me give you a ride," he said through the car window. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to be polite because even though I was scared, I tried to be rational. All he did was offer a girl a ride home who was walking in the cold at night. Also, with the possibility of him being a kidnapper or a rapist, it was really best not to piss him off on the empty street. "No thank you," I said politely but firmly that I hesitated for a second. I was trying to figure out what to say that would get him to leave me alone away which street I lived on. "I'm okay," I insisted. "Thanks, though." As I finished thanking him, I started walking again, now putting both headphones in with the song paused. It was more of a way to signal that I was done talking to him. He didn't say anything, but I knew that he was watching me walk away. I felt relieved when I got a few more feet away from his car and heard the sound of his tires driving away. Unfortunately, the situation was only getting worse. As I started walking past the entrance of a car dealership, I saw the same car making a U-turn in the middle of the street out of the corner of my eye. When I turned slightly, he pulled up to the sidewalk yet again, this time a few feet in front of me. The man then opened the driver's seat door and got out of the car. It was at that point I was actually afraid I wouldn't make it home that night. He looked at me with this weird expression on his face. He had this really focused look while trying to look casual. It's really hard to describe. He started walking up to me. This kind of situation had never happened to me before, but I always thought of dangerous hypothetical situations in my head. I guess thinking about those situations prepared me to an extent because before I even realized it, my phone was already against my ear like I was on the phone with someone, even though I wasn't. When he came closer to me, he saw my phone in my hand and must have realized someone could know where I am right now, or I could be calling 911. That's the only explanation I can think of because when he looked at my phone, his demeanor totally changed. He stopped in his tracks with a worried look on his face and then asked me, "Oh, are you on the phone with someone right now?" I replied, looking at him with my phone still against my face and my other hand casually in my pocket. Without saying anything else, the man immediately turned around, got back in his car, and then started to drive up the street. I walked slowly at first, letting some distance grow between us, but as soon as I felt safer, I walked up the street as fast as I could without slipping. I frantically tried to call my dad, who I thought was home at the time. He didn't pick up. I then tried to call my sister and my fiancé. I didn't feel like I was in danger anymore, but my adrenaline was through the roof and I wanted to hear from someone who would make me feel better. I gave up calling after I couldn't get in touch with anyone and just kept walking. I was finally getting ready to turn onto another street when I passed an empty parking lot and saw the same man leaning against his car looking over at me. "Hey," was all he said in a flat tone when I walked by. At this point, I was completely freaked out. I didn't have my phone out anymore, so I couldn't pretend I was talking to someone again, and I was also significantly closer to my house. If he decided to get into his car and follow me, there wasn't any detour I could take to try and lose him. I was now on the verge of tears, and that's when I decided to call 911. I called 911 and told them the situation. The officer on the other line stayed on the phone with me until I got into my house. After that, an officer came to my house and asked me a bunch of questions about the man. He also asked me about his car and where I last saw him. All of the details were either too vague or I didn't remember. He said that he would at least patrol the area for him. I'm not really sure if he actually did or not, but it made me feel better at the time. From that point, I needed a ride to and from work every shift until I got my schedule changed to day shifts. Just a few weeks later, the college semester ended and I was planning on skipping a semester anyway. That experience only reinforced my decision. The more I think about that situation, the more I realize how lucky I was. I was in the perfect position to be taken, but I actually used some quick thinking that really de-escalated the situation. I moved in with my fiancée, and now I have a pocket knife and pepper spray for whenever I walk home at night from my new job. It's something to remember. If you haven't called 911, if you don't have anything to defend yourself against someone, either let someone know where you are or pretend that they know where you are. It can potentially save your life. The New York City subway system is a scary place. I've been an MTA worker for 7 years, and nothing really surprises me anymore. When friends and family ask if I have any stories, though, there is one that stands out among the rest, one that I can't explain. This happened to me about 2 years into the job, but I remember it like it was yesterday. I was pretty acclimated to everything at that point, and things had become routine. I was stationed in Brooklyn at the time, and I was doing some routine maintenance in High Street Station. There wasn't a soul on the platform. It was actually kind of eerie. You're used to these subway stations overflowing with people, so seeing them empty and almost deserted looking was a strange adjustment to make. I hadn't seen a person on the platform in hours, and it was dead silent except for the buzz of the lights and the occasional passing train. Out of nowhere, I heard a clang from somewhere down the track. It startled me so badly that I dropped my mop in shock. The sound wasn't something I was used to hearing. The best way I could describe it to you is that sound that a rock would make if it had been dropped on a metal rail. I stopped what I was doing and looked into the tunnel, listening for other noises. After a while, I concluded that whatever I heard had either been caused by an animal or a falling piece of cement. After all, these stations were pretty old. I went back to work, not thinking too much about the sound. About 10 minutes later, the same sound shook me from my concentration. Only this time, it was probably about twice as loud. This time, I actually became a little concerned, dare I say, scared. Was it really possible that 2 chunks of the ceiling had fallen in the span of 10 minutes? I put down my supplies and walked over to the tunnel entrance, trying to be quiet. I peered into the darkness and couldn't really see anything. I debated whether or not it was a good idea to call out into the tunnel and ultimately decided against it. I still figured it was nothing, but after the initial fear had worn off, I was more confused than anything. I kept trying to think of things that could make a sound like that, not once, but twice. It was especially bizarre since the second sound was louder. I tried to keep my mind off the sounds and went back to work, finding a good rhythm again. I was almost done with my work on this platform and was pleased that I'd get to leave this weird station soon. As I was wrapping things up, I heard something that gave me the chills. A child's voice called out for help from inside the tunnel, and he sounded like he was in distress. I instantly stopped what I was doing and made my way over to the edge of the platform. I hesitated for a few seconds before deciding that a child in anguish wasn't something my moral conscience would allow me to ignore. I walked down the steps leading onto the tracks and waited for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. I shouted into the tunnel, asking the kid if he was okay. No response. That's weird, I thought, starting to feel nervous about this encounter. Just then, the kid's voice rang out again, repeating his call for help. I yelled back, asking him if he could hear me. He responded, yes, and I asked where specifically he was. There was a brief moment of silence before he just said, in front of you. Just keep walking. I really didn't want to, but couldn't just leave some helpless kid all alone on those tracks. It was dangerous. I began walking forward when something dawned on me. I yelled into the darkness one more time, this time asking the kid what was wrong. An uncomfortable pause again before the kid responded, just keep walking. I didn't like that. This whole thing was off. My eyes finally adjusted to the darkness, and I was able to slightly make out what was in front of me. There actually was what looked like the shadow of a kid just up the tracks, but there was something else that almost made me scream in fear, another shadow, this one much taller, obviously an adult. My blood ran cold, and I stopped in place. This wasn't happening to me. As slowly as I could, I turned around and made my way back to the platform. Luckily, I wasn't chased on the way back. The kid shouted, "Wait, where are you going?" once I reached the platform, but I wasn't sticking around another second. I made my way up the stairs and called the police as soon as I got cell service. I told them everything, and police were swarming the platform in a matter of minutes. I waited to see what they turned up. After about 30 minutes of searching, they did find something chilling. There was a single kid's shoe just lying in the tunnel, which the police hypothesized could have signified a struggle. After hours more of searching and scouring every available database for missing children, we were told we'd receive a call if anything ever came up. It was concluded that whoever had been down there, though, had hidden somewhere in the tunnels. I have no idea what to think of this experience. This is the best theory I can come up with. Some psycho kidnapped a child and forced him to yell for help in an attempt to lure some unsuspecting Good Samaritan into a trap. Or hell, maybe it's their own kid who they're raising to also be a psycho. I can't think of any other reasonable explanation besides this one. But if I'm right, I can only imagine what that kid must be going through. My dad has been an MTA Transit subway station manager for 35 years. With this job, there has to be a manager on duty at all times, so he's practically done every single possible shift throughout his career. That means he's done his fair share of night shifts. Most trains were completely empty throughout the night. He said it was the only nice part about doing the night shift. He has a series of funny and weird night shift stories to tell, but there's one downright horrifying one. My dad had just boarded the train to move to his office at another station. He was alone when he got on, which was at about 2 o'clock in the morning. At the next station, someone boarded. My dad describes him as a white, tall, and skinny man wearing a heavy jacket and beanie. He shot my dad a quick glance before sitting in the farthest corner away from him. My dad said that he felt uncomfortable as the guy kept looking up at him every so often. When my dad's stop came, he got off, as well as the other man. He walked to his office door, unlocked it, and looked behind him. The man in the jacket was pacing around only about 50 feet away. My dad stepped into his office, shut the door, locked it, and sat at his desk. 5 minutes later, someone started to try and turn the doorknob. After the person on the other side of the door realized it was locked, they started to knock softly. My dad called out, "Who is it?" and they responded, "I want to talk." He told whoever it was to go away. He says he knew trouble when he saw it. He had a good feeling it was the guy from the train, as this station at a time like this was apparently always completely empty. My dad told the guy to go away. He continued to knock for a good 5 minutes. My dad finally pulled up the security camera screens and brought up the camera pointed at his office door. Sure enough, it was the guy from the train, wearing the jacket and beanie. Coincidentally, as soon as my dad brought up the camera, the man walked away. So, my dad did whatever his work consisted of for about half an hour in that office before leaving to catch the next train. He checked the camera to make sure that the weird guy wasn't out there. He locked up and walked down the stairs to the train platform, where he got on the train right away. Looking out the window, he saw the guy from before walking down the stairs to the platform and then stepping on the train into the same car as my dad. He sat down on the opposite side, a few seats to the right. My dad tried to look away and pretend not to notice him, but he knew the guy was staring at him. He at one point gave in and stared back, giving a slight nod and smile in some sort of truce attempt before looking away again. The man stared at my dad the whole ride to the next station, but my dad never looked back at him once after the first time. Now, you may be asking, why didn't he try to forcibly get the guy to back off? Well, despite my dad's intimidating size, he's always been a complete teddy bear, no bark and no bite. Plus, he says he feared that the guy was armed and that one small motion could lead to death. When the train stopped at the station, my dad practically ran all the way back up to the streets, constantly glancing over his shoulder. And yes, the man from the train was following him. My dad had to find the first public building still open to try and escape. He found a Wendy's that was open and stepped inside. He sat and watched as the guy following him walked up to the window, stopped, and stared my dad down through the glass for about 10 seconds before turning around and walking across the street and then down the sidewalk. My dad said he ate, waited a little longer, then left the Wendy's to get to his third and final station for the night. The scariest part, when my dad was in his third office, as he was checking the security cameras out of paranoia of the situation, he caught the guy from the train pacing around the outside only about 30 feet from his office. He then stopped, looked up at the camera, and, according to my dad, literally froze and stared for no less than a minute. When he finally lowered his head, he walked away out of the station to never be seen by my dad again. My dad doesn't know if he was followed after leaving the Wendy's, but that would only make sense. The guy was clearly disturbed, possibly homeless, or dangerous. Who knows what he actually wanted with my dad? Me and my 3 friends were in New York around Christmas time. We didn't finally decide to leave until about maybe 2 o'clock in the morning. We got on the first train that we could catch, and as expected, it was empty. We were pretty sobered up by then. Then there was a sudden commotion in the next car over. We had peeped through the glass in between the cars and there were 2 hooded men, or maybe teenagers, standing obnoxiously close to a woman sitting in one of the seats who was screaming for help. I suggested that we go over and kick their asses, but as me and a buddy got a closer look, we saw they were armed with handguns. I pushed all my friends to get to the next car over, away from the armed men. I took a look back and saw one of the men pointing at us before starting to follow. We ran through at least 3 different cars with the men following us before the train finally stopped at the next station. We all booked it through the old station to the nearest place we could hide. I got separated from my friends, so I went to hide behind a garbage can. I could hear my chaser's shoes hitting the tiled floors, so I knew I had no time to find a better hiding spot. I peeked through the opening at the top of the bin. I could get a better look at them now. One was black, the other was Indian, and they were both really young looking. I was sure they were only trying to rob us until I heard one of them say, "If you find them, kill them." I hope you understand why I almost gave away my position in reaction to hearing this, with a gasp and almost pulling the garbage bin down with me as I returned to cover it. I consider it a miracle neither of them caught me. They left the area. I took notice that they didn't have their guns drawn at that moment. I ran in the opposite direction of the two and quickly caught my friends who were waving me over from behind a large pole. I took cover with them behind another pole not far from that one, and we waited for as long as we thought necessary. The big shock to the story, though, was when we caught a glimpse of the woman from the train, who we thought was being threatened by the 2 men, walking over in the direction of the men and then calling something along the lines of, "Where are they? Don't tell me you didn't get them." The 2 men reappeared from beyond a corner, walking over to the woman. The rest of what they said was too low to pick up on. They walked back down the stairs to the platforms and, as we could guess, waited for another train to run their trap again. At the very least, we called the police and reported what was going on, but I have no idea if they were ever caught. This is narrated from the perspective of a female. This happened a few years ago in Rome, Italy. I was walking alone along the street that leads to the train station. It was around 2 p.m. on a working day, so almost practically no one was around. There were not many shops either on that street, and the few that existed were closed. A man was walking in my same direction just a few meters ahead of me. Casually, he turned back and noticed me. It was one of those instinctive reactions that you cannot conceal. His face said it all. He was roughly 6 foot tall and well built, not exactly the body structure you would like to see such a face on. His eyes openly said, "I've been to jail and I'm highly likely to go back again." He went along his way ahead of me and then turned again a couple more times, slowing down his pace. In a few moments, the situation was reversed. I was walking in front of him now. I didn't turn around. It was useless. I knew he was following me. I didn't hurry up. I just pretended I didn't notice him. I was listening to the radio on my smartphone with earbuds in and just simply kept on doing it. But you can imagine just how much I was panicking on the inside, all alone on the street with a 6-foot-tall criminal walking after me. I kept walking, struggling to the very last bit of my soul, acting as if nothing was happening, while desperately searching for an escape out of the situation. Then, after a few more minutes like this, I saw 2 men talking vivaciously outside of their shop. I seized the occasion and stopped right after them, pretending to scroll up and down on my phone. With the tail of my eye, though, I kept glancing beyond the 2 men, and I was right because after a few moments I saw him stretching his neck trying to spot me. He saw I had stopped and he was leaning against the wall near the 2 other men. He then turned back and went away. I'm pretty sure that I must have had a guardian angel that day who sent those 2 men and placed them at the right time and right place. Nothing else happened, but only because I was extremely lucky. To all the ladies out there, never take for granted that you're safe just because you're in broad daylight. And never give in to fear. I come from a small town in Pennsylvania, and I've lived here all of my life. I'm 17 years old, and the time this story took place, I was around 14 years old. My memory around this is a little hazy because I don't like to talk about it, but I figured I'd let out any dark feelings I still get by it. It may not be considered a scary story, but to me, this was probably one of the most scariest things that I've ever been through. At the time this happened, I was an 8th grader in middle school. During the time, my mom worked at Panera Bread, and she had to work very early in the morning, so me and my sister would usually take the bus to school while my dad and my little brother, who was around 4 years old at the time, would stay home. This will be important later. It was like any other ordinary day. Me and my sister would get ready and leave it around 7:20 a.m. to walk to our bus stop. We lived in an apartment complex, and we would have to walk the 3 minutes to the front of the apartment because that's where the bus would pick us up. A little background information: me and my sister would meet up with our friends at the bus stop since we lived in the same apartment complex, and we would wait until the bus showed up. I would stay at the back with my friend, while my sister and her friend would be towards the front, 5 feet from the stop. So, like our usual routine, I had met up with my friend, Reed, and my sister would meet up with her friend, who I'll call Lelia. We waited for the bus to show up. Me and Reed would always see this boy, who I'll refer to as Scott. He was a year younger than us, and he would always run across the street to our bus stop to get a seat since we would be the first to be picked up. This was because by the time the bus driver would pick him up, he'd be the last person, and there would be no seats left for him to sit at. So he began to run across the street, and we were used to seeing him run across like that. Reed and I would always laugh at the way he ran, but wouldn't pay any more attention after he made it across. This will also be important. So, as we're waiting for the bus to arrive, me and my friend were talking, and there would be 5 other kids waiting for the bus at the front of the apartments as well. And like always, we see Scott across the street, waiting for the bus to arrive. A few minutes go by, and we see the yellow bus coming towards our stop. So everyone on our side begins to gather their belongings, and we begin to form a line as the bus gets closer. It begins to blink its lights, and the stop sign starts to come out at the side, as a sign for the other cars to stop. And for just a second, I begin to see Scott running across. I don't give it 2 thoughts since this was normal, and I began to hear the screeching noise coming from the opposite side of the road. It was like everything was going in slow motion during those couple of seconds, and I remember hearing the screeching noise become louder and louder. As I'm picking up my head to see what the noise was, I heard a big thump noise, and what I saw next will forever remain in my mind until this day. I hear a big thump noise, and I then see Scott flying in the air. I then see Scott hitting the ground so hard, and the noise was so loud as he then made an impact to the street. I remember hearing my friend Reed then scream at the top of her lungs, and I then quickly looked at the car, and I saw the driver inside. I remember seeing the bus driver quickly taking out his walkie-talkie attached to his radio as he was then saying all these codes into it. I then see Scott running around the bus and towards where our bus stop was, and he then had his arms wrapped around his stomach, and he was bleeding all around his head. He also had these cuts on his face, and he was crying wildly. During that moment, I was so horrified that I froze, and I was so scared to say anything. The driver then came out of the car and began to panic, then sang to Scott, "Oh my God, man, I'm so sorry. I never even saw you. I was looking down for 1 second, and then it just happened." But Scott was in so much pain, then he didn't even pay attention to him. Then this kid in my sister's grade ran up to him, then sang, "Hey, man, do you need an ambulance?" Scott was just crying, then shaking his head yes. The boy then took out his phone and called 911, telling the operator everything that happened. The driver then fell to the ground, took a cell phone out, and began to call someone. He then put it on speaker, and once the person picked up and said hello, he'd been sad, "Mom," to the kid, "so sorry." And he then began to break down in tears, and he just kept repeating that same line over and over again. The driver's mother had tried to calm him down, and then the driver just said, "Please forgive me, please. And even my car, it's a friend's car." Scott just stayed on the ground, lying there, as everyone watched him. The next thing I remember was that Scott always had his mother and brother take him to the bus stop, and they would always make sure he got on, but on this day, they never went with him to the bus stop. I then began to check on my sister, making sure she was okay. Her and her friends seemed a little shaken up, but they were okay. Reed's mom and sister were running up to us, and I remember hugging them. At that moment, I felt so alone and horrified. I began to cry hysterically, and my sister was just trying to comfort me. Something that I always regret was never telling my parents right away about what happened. I didn't want to wake and worry my dad, and I didn't want to get my mom in trouble for leaving early. I knew that she suffered from anxiety, so I didn't want to give her a panic attack, which she would get every once in a while. So, my sister and I just decided to wait there. I remember calling my friend, who I'll call Kara. I remember that her and her mom worked at the school next to ours, and I began to tell her everything that happened. I began to break down. They quickly alerted the front desk, and she calmed me down, telling me everything was going to be okay. I know some of you might be thinking, how was I able to call my friend but not my parents? But during that moment, I just felt the need to call Cindy because she was who I trusted at the time, and we're still friends to this day. About 20 minutes later, the ambulance arrived. They began to check Scott and treat him while he was lying on the ground, still crying and in pain. 10 minutes passed, and I began to come at ease. They started to place him on the stretcher. I remember seeing his mom and brother running with a paramedic towards him, and they had the most worried and horrified faces that I've ever seen. I began to feel so sad for them. Reed, my sister, and I thought it would be okay if we went to school just to try and take our minds off of everything that happened and all of the horror we witnessed 40 minutes ago. We were at our bus stop for almost an hour, and we still got picked up at the next stop and then immediately went to school. I remember the staff waiting there for us and separating the apartment complex bus stop kids, escorting us to the library. I won't go into too much detail, but they pretty much stated that we could stop by the counselor's office anytime during the school day, and if we wanted to leave school, we were able to. After that event, I didn't take the bus for 4 months and was dropped off. I didn't want to cross the street, and whenever I would hear a tire screech, I would always jump and begin to get a cold sweat. A few months later, I began to feel better and continued to live a normal life. After that, Scott didn't go to school until months later, until he was finally okay, towards the end of the year. Like I said, I know this wasn't the typical stalker story, but this was one horrific event that I went through, and I never want to go through it again. But remember to stay safe out there. I really hope many people don't ever have to witness what I and the other kids had to see that day. It was truly awful. New York City trains are pretty crazy. I've been groped and harassed, and I've seen things that I don't ever want to see again. My best friend and I were neighbors living in Upper Manhattan. It was summertime, and it was pretty late. It was around 8:30-ish, and we wanted to go to the west side to get some milkshakes because we always liked to go out late for little adventures. Of course, my parents didn't want us to go out late, but we kept pushing it, and we ended up going. In order to get to where we wanted to go, we had to take the subway. As we're coming back, it was already 9:30-ish, so we expected to get back home around 10. The train arrived, and my best friend and I hopped in. The train car was empty, so we sat on the chairs with 2 seats. As we arrived at the next stop, a man came into the same car. We didn't think anything of it until the man sat right across from us. Keep in mind, the train car was nearly empty, and he could have picked literally any other seat but decided to sit across from us. Of course, my friend and I thought that was weird, so we texted each other saying we were going to move to the next car when we got to the next stop. As we were heading to the next stop, we quickly ran out of the train and ran to a different car. We just kind of laughed it off until our smiles slowly turned into worried faces when we saw the same man coming into the new car we had just moved to. Obviously, my friend and I felt completely uncomfortable. We moved all the way down to the opposite end of the car, and the man did the same exact thing. Keep in mind, the man himself didn't look creepy. He looked pretty average, which honestly made me really surprised. But my friend and I quickly moved to the next car once we got to the next stop. We were pretty scared because we were only 15 years old, and we were females on a subway. Train going back home alone around 10 o'clock. I don't really remember how we lost the man, but luckily we did. We quickly ran back home after we got off our stop, also making sure we weren't being followed. We didn't tell our parents because we knew they wouldn't let us out again, so we just kept it to ourselves. Nothing crazy like this ever happened again to us, but now we know to be more careful taking the subway home. For anyone that comes to New York and takes the subway, please be careful because you really never know who's gonna follow you. I'm a student in Rome and I live about 2 hours away from it, so whenever I have to go there, I have to go by train. I do have my driver's license, but I prefer the train because I can study on the way there. Plus, in Italy, it's quite common for students to move by train to reach the cities where we study. So, this one day in question, I was waiting at the train station in Roma Tiburtina with my boyfriend for my train to come. This is one of those times where I would get on the train by myself because he had an extra lesson the following day, so he was just keeping me company. We both noticed a weird guy with a bike acting strange, like he was drunk or something, but we didn't pay much attention because the station is often full of drunk homeless people roaming around. Here's why he never lets me go alone to the station, especially at night. So, we sat and waited for my train, and when it finally arrived, I got up, kissed my boyfriend goodbye, and got on the train. I did notice the guy with the bike standing in line behind me to get on the train, but I honestly didn't give it that much thought. After all, lots of people took my same train, and there were often drunk people trying to board without a ticket. When I got on the train, it was packed. No matter how many carriages I passed, I couldn't find a seat, so I just sighed and decided to go sit by the train door. I don't know about other countries, but here in Italy, some trains have a little seat by the door that you can unfold. So, I unfolded one of those and sat there, taking out my history book and starting my long study session. About 5 minutes into my studying, I felt something on my cheek. It was a hand. I raised my gaze from my book, and there he was, the guy with the bike. I immediately jerked his hand away from my face and asked, who are you and what do you want? He simply just stood there smiling, so I asked again, who are you? He then looked me dead in the eyes, still with that creepy grin, and said, "I'm no one. I'm just a dude. Wanna have some fun?" I didn't even bother answering. I just started picking up my stuff to leave, but then he put his arm right in front of me, blocking my way into the carriage. So, I grabbed his wrist, dug my nails into it, and then jerked it away, freeing my passage to the much more crowded carriage where he couldn't do anything to me. I tried to look for the ticket inspector to get some help, but he just kept following me. One very kind man noticed the creep was following me, so he offered me a seat and told me to stay there while he went to look for the inspector. I sat down and waited. I honestly thought that I was safe, that he wouldn't try to do anything in front of so many people, but I was wrong. He started going back and forth along the corridor of the carriage, and every time he passed me, he would try to touch me. He would caress my shoulder or face or even try to go to my breasts, despite the fact that I kept jerking his hands away. Everybody just watched and said nothing, absolutely nothing, to help me. After a while, the man came back with the ticket inspector and the creep ran away in the opposite direction. The inspector came up to me, and I showed him a picture of the dude that I'd managed to take, telling him that he was following me and touching me. So, the inspector went after the creep and eventually caught him a few carriages forward. He then proceeded to call the police. The police came to the next station, and while waiting, the creep was placed near his bike by the door with the inspector constantly watching him. At the train station, 2 officers had to literally lift him out of the train because he was resisting, saying that we were friends and that I obviously liked his attention. But he got arrested anyway. And the worst part of all this, no one even dared to help me on that train when he was trying to touch me in front of everyone. There was even a woman who said I must have done something to turn him on. So, even though I was just a student minding my own business, just sitting there looking at my books, in her mind, I must have done something to turn him on. Still to this day, I can't believe I was the one being blamed for his creepy behavior. Seriously, what the? So recently, I had an experience while I was at a friend's house alone, watching his dog, that inspired me to do another Home Alone themed video. I spent so much time reading stories of people's horrific experiences that I forget these things could happen to me too. In a bit of a different fashion, I'll tell that experience I had after the viewer submitted stories at the end of the video. A more positive experience I would also like to talk about is my experience with Scentbird, a fragrance subscription service that allows you to choose new designer fragrances to try out every month at an affordable price. You get to try the first fragrance from Scentbird for only $8, and your next month will be only $16.95. The vials are cheaper than a lot of the rollerballs or travel sizes you'll find elsewhere. Scentbird is a great solution for beginners in fragrance looking to experiment with certain scents. Scentbird allows you to try different designer fragrances from brands like Prada, Gucci, and Versace with a 30-day supply of any fragrance you choose. This way, if you're just getting into building your fragrance collection, you can test out what you like and what you don't without having to purchase a full bottle. Through Scentbird, I found my favorite scents, Eros Flame by Versace, which mixes Italian lemon, pink pepper, and vetiver for a classier scent, and Cross River Gorilla by Sanctuary for a more casual scent. So if you're looking to start your own collection, head on over to Scentbird by scanning my QR code using code 55nightmare to get 55% off your first month at Scentbird. Growing up, I was raised in rural Michigan. There was hardly anything to do. If you like staring at trees and crops and lots of alone time, that was the place to be. I got out of there as soon as I got a car and enough money to move. I'm not a nature hater or anything, but I'd pick being by a big city any day. My parents don't own that property anymore. They sold it 5 years ago. But to describe it, it was a 3-acre property. The house itself was pretty big, and there was a storage building out back. I was 13 when this happened. My parents would leave me alone often at this age. They trusted me because I matured at a young age and I had responsibilities on the property. It was a weekend, and I was playing Vice City on my PS2 in the living room when suddenly, a loud metallic bang came from outside somewhere in the yard. I right away ran to every window I could to look outside to see if I could see something, and I didn't see anything until I got to the window looking out the storage building out back. The door to it was completely open. I went immediately to grab the rifle from the closet and go outside. I made my presence known, shouting, "Who's in there?" to no avail. When I got to the door, I made it known I had a gun before looking inside. There was a bunch of stuff in there, from the sit-down mower to the quad to infinite little lawn care items. Someone could have been hiding behind any of that stuff. Even as a kid, I didn't scare easily, but at that moment, I got really unsettled. So I closed the door to the building and went back inside the house. I locked the door and then sat at the window for the longest time, watching the storage building, expecting the door to open at any second. That door was heavy and impossible to just open by itself. It was simply a fact that someone came and opened it. Whether they were still inside of the building, I wasn't sure. I decided to go call my dad and ask his opinion. I went to the kitchen to the landline phone and called my dad's cell phone. He didn't pick up, so I left a voicemail. This was back when you'd still have to leave someone a voicemail because texting wasn't mainstream. After that, I went back to sitting next to the window, but now I put on a TV show in the background to make this less monotonous. I took the phone with me. I was probably about to give up when I heard creaks from upstairs. My heart was now in my throat. I had to ask myself the big question: was I working myself up or was someone here? I had a serious guard dog mentality. Even if I didn't love that place, I saw it as mine, my family's. I had to protect it, but I was in over my head. I grabbed the rifle again and walked upstairs. I didn't say anything. Calling out would only make a potential intruder know that I heard them. I made it to the top of the stairs and I turned on the light for the upstairs hallway. There were 5 doors to open, all of them closed. 4 led to bedrooms, 1 led to the bathroom. Each door had a decently large crack underneath that would allow you to see looking out the crack under the door where the creak in the ceiling came from the side of the house my parents' bedroom was on. I got down on my knees and looked under the crack of the door. I saw 2 bare feet facing the other side of the door. I felt my stomach twist into a knot. The reality of the situation just became so much more real, and I realized I wasn't ready to threaten or, God forbid, shoot someone. I got up and quickly went downstairs, hiding in the bathroom to call my dad. He still didn't pick up. I left another voicemail and then called again and again. He never picked up. He must have had his phone set down somewhere. I finally called 911, as I should have done right away, and I whispered into the phone the whole time, detailing exactly what was taking place. I was told to sit tight in the bathroom and not say a word. I heard footsteps coming down the stairs, and then they approached the bathroom door as if whoever it was somehow knew I went straight to the bathroom. The footsteps stopped outside the door, and there was a brief pause before a deep voice said, "What's up, kid?" I still remember the voice and those words so vividly. If I heard that voice today, I'd still recognize it immediately. I almost wanted to cry, that's how scared I was. I disobeyed what the operator told me and spoke. I said loud and clear, "I'm on the phone with the cops right now, and I have a gun. I put the operator on speaker as she was asking me if everything was okay. The man attempted to open the door, and when he realized it was locked, I heard him walk away. I heard the footsteps fade to silence, and then the sound of a door slamming. It was the sound of the back door, I'm sure. I breathed a sigh of relief, and from there on, I waited for the police to arrive. When they did, I felt like £1,000,000 had just lifted off my shoulders. After a thorough inspection of the house, inside and out, confirming that the man was gone, they asked if there was anywhere else I could stay that night, and I said yes, my uncle's house. We contacted my uncle, who came and spoke with the police, then he took me back to his place. The thing that haunts me the most is that it was my fault. I could have prevented this. I left the door unlocked as I went to the storage building to investigate. Clearly, that's when the man simply walked right into the house. Even with a rifle in my hands, I didn't feel safe at all. It was truly the most horrific experience of my life. I was home alone one night for a reason I don't remember. All I remember is my entire family was gone. I was 13 or 14 years old. I was a big gamer at the time. I was obsessed with StarCraft, and admittedly sometimes spend a weekend night or two playing StarCraft or some other PC game. This was right before co-lockdown started. I was playing StarCraft on my computer in my bedroom on the first floor. That's when the doorbell rang twice. I hurried to the door, not wanting to be away from the game for too long, in fear of losing. I got to the front door and said, "Who is it?" as I always would if I was alone. A soft and weak voice on the other side said something that I couldn't hear. It sounded like a woman. I opened the door with the storm door still separating me and this older woman standing on the other side with a big smile on her face. She had her hands behind her back. I said through the door, "Can I help you?" She said she needed to use a phone and asked if she could come inside. Ever since I was a little kid, I was always taught not to let a stranger into the house, ever. That included women. I felt so awkward, though. I didn't know how to turn her away. I redirected her to the library a few blocks down because they'd surely have a phone. Deep down, I knew the library was closed at this point, but I was just trying to get this stranger who was trying to get into my house to leave. She was still smiling, but what she said next did not match her smile. She said, "That's very rude to turn away an old lady asking for help." I replied the only way I could think to, and that was that my parents don't allow strangers into the house. It's a house rule. I slowly started closing the door as I was saying sorry, and she just stood there, not moving, but still smiling at me. And though her smile never changed, it suddenly felt much more menacing. I was walking back to my room when the doorbell rang again. There was no way in hell I was opening the door again. That woman radiated weird vibes from the start. Maybe something was wrong with her. Maybe she wasn't all there. These were things I had no way of knowing, and maybe that was selfish of me to send her on her way, but I just wasn't opening the door for anyone when I was home alone. I went back to my game, not too long after I sat back down. I heard something tapping on the window. It was a clinking type sound from something metal. The window was directly in front of my desk. I had the blind pulled down, so I couldn't see what was making the noise, but I already had an idea. My room was the only room with a light on in the house. The horrible thought that it was the old woman from just before, and that she walked over to my window, terrified me. I turned off the sound on my computer at this point. I didn't care about my game anymore. The clanking sound on the window persisted. I basically said, "F this," and up and left to a different room in the house. I sat in the darkness of the living room for a bit. When the doorbell rang again, this woman was harassing me now. I tried to convince myself she wasn't a threat, just some crazy old woman who's probably clueless as to where she is. When she rang the doorbell a second and third time, I decided to go open the door and ask her if there's someone I could call for her, but when I opened the door there was now a man on the other side. He looked to be about 10 years younger than her. He said through the storm door, "Have you seen my mother?" I replied saying yes, she came to my door just before. He then apologized to me and said she has dementia and got out of the house. I suddenly felt bad, but he asked me if he could come in for a minute. And again, I felt awkward. Why did he need to come inside? I said the same thing that I told to the woman who he claimed to be his mother. I said we could just talk through this door. I then said that I think she went into my backyard because I heard something at my window. I told him he could go around back and check. He thanked me and walked down the walkway, and I thought he went into the backyard, but when I went to the back and looked out the back window expecting to see him searching around, I saw nobody, not him or his mom. This was all too weird for me. I went to bed on the earlier side that night, just falling asleep with the TV on in the background until I heard the clear blinking sound on the window again. Something metal was tapping on the glass. I remembered the concerned man and I decided to try and help. I went to the window, lifted the blind up with my hand, and I saw that woman outside my window with that same creepy smile. She was tapping a kitchen knife on my window. I closed the blind and crawled back into my bed. This didn't feel like it was actually happening. A suspiciously short amount of time later, the doorbell rang like 4 times. The clinking onto the window stopped by this point. This was all too suspicious. It felt like some kind of robbery attempt. I ignored the doorbell. I stayed in my bed. I was going to wait this out. I didn't have a cell phone at this time. I wasn't the most social guy growing up. I also didn't want to call the police for some reason. I waited this all out until it finally stopped. The next morning I told my dad what happened. When I called him, he told me I was smart not to open the door. Everyone agreed that everything about it sounded like an attempted robbery. Is there a chance that maybe that woman really did have dementia and that the man was really her concerned son? Maybe. But it all seemed too coordinated. Why did he want to come into the house too? How did he even know she came to my house specifically? Why didn't he ever go into the backyard to look for her when I gave him permission to do so? Too many unanswered questions that lead me to believe I avoided something terrible happening if I opened that door. This happened to me just a bit over a year ago. I'm 24 and have a townhouse in the suburbs. I live alone, which for me gets really boring, so I try to have friends over whenever I can. My closest friends come a couple of times a week and sometimes even sleep over to escape their parents' houses. I didn't have any plans this night, but I had plans for the next day with my friend Adam, who was supposed to be coming over to have a movie night. So I really was just trying to get this night over with and looking forward to the next day. I went to bed early, like 9:15. In the middle of the night, I woke up. I looked at my nightstand and saw it was 2 a.m., but the way I woke up was odd. My heart was pounding for some reason, and my brain was very alert and aware, like something was happening. I thought maybe I had just woken up from a nightmare or something until I heard a click from downstairs. I sat up. A door slowly screeched open, and I could hear someone's footsteps entering my home. Although terrified, I thought this had to be Adam or one of my other friends, as they all had keys to my house in case they needed somewhere to stay. I got up from my bed and walked over to the door, opening it and stepping into the hallway. Adam, no one responded. I waited in the hallway for what felt like forever, but then a bright light suddenly flickered on, lighting up the whole downstairs. A second later, soft chattering noise came from the living room. Whoever it was had turned on the TV. For a moment, I felt relief, thinking it was definitely one of my friends who had one too many drinks. I went down the stairs and into the living room and felt my whole body turn ice cold in an instant. Some random man was sitting on my couch, looking at the TV screen. He looked maybe 50 years old with patchy long black hair and dirty clothes. As I stared at him in fear, he glanced over at me and showed a crooked smile, then waved his hand as if to invite me over to the couch. I turned around and sprinted right out the front door. I banged on my neighbor's door until they let me in and called the police. By the time they made it, though, he was gone, no trace of him at all. What's worse is the police didn't take it all that seriously, suggesting it was probably just some harmless homeless man wanting a place to sleep. The way I see it, everything points to otherwise. He picked the lock on my door, sat on my couch, and turned on the TV. Then the sick man smiled at me and invited me over to the couch. I think he may have been a stalker or something, and now I find it hard to even sleep at night when I'm alone, thinking that there's a chance that I'm not really alone. My wife and I take yearly vacations to different places. It's our way of taking a break from regular everyday life as well as getting to spend some quality time together. This year, we had a cabin booked in Washington State. It was far out and described online as being quiet and peaceful, away from any other places or people. Most of our life is in crowded cities, so this sounded great for us. When we flew in, we walked to a grocery store to pick up what we needed, then took a taxi out to the cabin. We didn't rent a car because we knew we'd only be there for 3 days, so we wanted to spend it just at the cabin. If we changed our minds or needed anything else, we could always just order an Uber. The taxi ride was just over an hour from the town we landed in. Most of the drive was between huge mountain ranges and tree-covered landscape. It was really beautiful and got us both excited for our stay. Then at just about 7 p.m., we arrived at the cabin. It was completely alone in the middle of the forest. Even the driveway leading to it wasn't much more than some tire tracks in the dirt. We got out, paid the taxi, then brought our stuff inside. The cabin itself was small. There was the main floor that had the kitchen and living room, with a ladder leading up to a loft area that had the bed in it. The bed area on the loft was short, though. You literally had to crawl into the bed, kind of like one you'd see in a tiny home. Anyway, we unpacked the groceries and made a very quick dinner since we were tired from the flight. Then we opened a bottle of wine to settle in for the night. We lit up the fireplace and chatted about how we were looking forward to the next few days. It was around 11 p.m. at this point, and as we talked, we both suddenly heard something outside. Someone was walking in the grass near the cabin. It was loud too, like they were really close. My wife looked nervous, so I tried to put a brave face on and told her it was fine. I got up and looked out the window. It wasn't until then that I realized how dark it had gotten outside. I looked around, seeing nothing but large trees everywhere and pitch-black darkness around them. I told her I didn't see anyone, then went over to the front door and opened it, stepping onto the porch and turning on the outdoor lights. All I could really see out there was a small portion of the driveway, but I didn't see anyone there either. The forest was very calm and quiet too, so if they were still walking around, I felt like I would have been able to hear them. I went back inside and asked my wife if she heard the footsteps anymore, but she said the sound didn't seem to fade out. It just stopped suddenly from somewhere behind the cabin. My brave act was starting to fall through, and I told her to go up to the loft and stay quiet while I figured out what was going on. I went around and checked all the windows again, not seeing anything. So, I went back to the front door, I was preparing myself to go back outside when a sudden thump shook the cabin. I looked up at my wife, who was looking up at the ceiling. Someone was on the roof of the cabin. I stayed inside and called the police, going over lengthy directions on how to get to the cabin we were at. Over the course of the hour that we had to wait, we could occasionally hear a few footsteps walking across the top of the cabin. About 45 minutes into the wait, though, we heard their boots hit the ground, followed by them calmly walking away. I looked out the window once more, seeing their outline disappearing into the forest. Police took our report and gave us a ride into town, where we spent the rest of our vacation. What that person was doing miles away from civilization in the middle of a forest is terrifying, seeing as they were likely waiting for us to either go to bed or go outside. We're just thankful that we got out of there before something else could have happened. This happened shortly after I turned 15 years old. As a birthday gift, my parents had given me an Xbox. I was even given my own monitor, which allowed me to play in my room. My room was upstairs, and in the weeks after my birthday, I of course spent a lot of time up there. It was a Saturday night. I was talking in an Xbox party chat with two of my school friends. Both of my parents went out of town at a work convention for the weekend, so I was home alone. I had my headphone volume pretty loud, but during a pause in our conversation, I heard a thumping sound come from downstairs. If you've ever been home alone as a kid, you'll know that any abnormal sound gets your mind imagining the worst. I turned down the volume and took one headphone off my ear. Nothing happened for the next 5 minutes, but shortly afterward, I heard the same noise again. I told my two friends about it this time, and they both encouraged me to go check it out, joking how someone might have broken in. I laughed and agreed to do it during the next break in our game. When that came, I took my headphones off and started walking towards the stairs. I began walking down them, and as I did, I began to hear soft whispering. I was only halfway down, but I completely froze up. I intently listened, trying to make out whether what I was hearing was actually real or not. Eventually, I crouched down to get a look into the living room. There, I saw 4 fully grown men, all completely covered in black, silently walking around. I genuinely couldn't process what I was seeing. All I knew is that I had to get back upstairs. I slowly started crawling back up them, and of course, one of the steps let out a loud creaking noise that echoed throughout the house before returning to silence. There was no way they didn't hear it. Thinking quick, I ran to my room, put on my headset, and told my friends to call the police to my house. They sounded confused and now in a serious tone asked what was going on. I didn't feel like I had enough time to explain, so I just told them to hurry and threw my headset down on my desk. I knew that locking myself in my room would be an obvious sign that I was inside. I still locked the door and closed it behind me, but instead, I hid in the bathroom further down the hallway with the light off and the door slightly cracked open so that they wouldn't think to check it. I could hear multiple sets of boots slowly walking up the stairs as I sat in silence. They kept getting louder until I could hear banging on my bedroom door down the hall. Not banging like trying to get my attention, whoever was doing it was clearly trying to break down the door. Voices started yelling out, saying things like how I needed to open the door if I didn't want anything bad to happen to me. I was absolutely horrified. I got up and started desperately opening the bathroom window. I guess I'd made too much noise because a set of boots started heading down the hall just as the bathroom door fully opened. I managed to dive out of the window head first. I landed badly on my neck but still managed to look back up at the bathroom window. A silhouette stood motionless, looking back at me. That's when the backyard door slid open and 3 men came running out towards me. I tried getting up to run, but I couldn't in time. All 3 of them started grabbing me and pulling me back towards the house, but this was interrupted by the distant sound of police sirens. The 3 of them stopped and looked up at each other. They then sprinted to the backyard fence, climbed it, and I never saw them again. A few moments later, the police showed up in the backyard. I told them which way the men had gone, to which a couple of them started off in that direction while another stayed with me. The only man that was caught that night was the one inside the house. The other 3 that ran were never found. As police were asking me questions, my 2 friends who I was playing Xbox with pulled into the driveway on their bikes. Even to this day, I still routinely thank them for calling the cops, as it likely saved my life. Found left behind in the house were 4 different knives and a couple of fully loaded pistols. I regrettably used to work at a hotel in our town. Our town had gotten hit by a hurricane a few months back, and a lot of houses were badly damaged, so many people vacated the place. The hotel is about a 15-minute walk from my house. The town and hotel name I'll leave out of this, as I really just don't want anything traced back to me. The hotel was a very standard bed and breakfast type place, you know, where they serve wet scrambled eggs, frozen sausages, and assorted cereals. The hotel had a busy month after the hurricane, as some people were out of their houses due to damages. But after a while, things quieted down, if anything, quieter than before the hurricane. I always worked nights from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. Then someone would relieve me at 2 a.m., and they'd work till 10 o'clock or 11 a.m. I could always see how many people were checked into the hotel, and at the time, it was only maybe 9 rooms, which wasn't a lot at all. I could go the whole night sometimes without seeing anyone. There was a back break room for employees with a coffee machine, fridge, table, and a couple of sofa-type chairs. The employee bathroom was also back there. At night, I spent most of my time back there. There was a bell at the front desk that people would ring if they needed anything. I was in the back when I heard a deep voice from the lobby saying, "Hello," repeatedly. I got up and went through the door leading to behind the counter and saw a man on the other side of the glass. There was a glass barrier with an opening underneath about 10 inches high. He said he needed towels. I grabbed him a couple of extra towels and slid them under the glass for him. He grabbed them rather aggressively, shot me this weird look, then walked to the room's hallway. I stayed in the lobby, now sitting in the rolling chair by the monitors, and I just watched that man on the camera walk down the hallway. He was looking around weirdly, then he started rubbing the towels on his face. I said out loud, "What in the world?" Then he got in the elevator, so I went back to the break room. It was maybe 10 minutes later when I heard a voice again from the lobby. It was the same voice. I walked back out, and that man was standing on the other side again. He said very loudly, "My key card is broken." I asked what his room number was. He said it was something random, like 2C something with a letter in it. Our hotel rooms strictly had numbers, no letters, so I knew this man was lying. I told him, "Sir, our rooms don't have letters. Are you sure you're staying here?" His reaction was not something I was expecting, nor was it something I wish I ever had to be a victim to. He threw the towels on the floor, started smiling, and slightly tilting his head as he got closer to the glass. When his face was practically pressed up on the glass, he said, "I'm going to kill you," still with a smile on his face. Then he said it again, louder, and again. Each time he said it, it got louder until it was almost a scream. I screamed back at him, "I'm calling the police," and I did. I picked up the phone and showed him as I dialed 911. He kept his disturbing smile as he now started mocking me, calling the police. As I spoke to the dispatcher on the phone, explaining very loudly what was happening in front of my face, the sick man laughed and headed for the door in a slow walk. I told the dispatcher he was leaving, and when he was gone through the doors and out of sight, I said he was gone. She asked me if I still wanted an officer to show up, and I said no, it's all right. So the next couple of hours of my shift went slow. I decided for obvious reasons to hang around in the lobby now instead of the break room. There was one guest who checked in during this time. At around 2 a.m., my relief came, and I clocked out and was free to go home. I walked outside to the parking lot. It was cold out. I remember wishing I had brought my coat. I walked with my hands in the pockets of my light jacket and my hood up. Then I heard a voice in the parking lot. I turned around. There was a line of bushes that covered the first floor windows of the hotel. It came from the bushes. I don't know what the voice said. I didn't care. I walked faster now. Once I got out of the parking lot, I was on a main road for a brief minute, but there were no cars on the road in this quiet town at this hour. After a minute, I turned left down a residential street that would eventually turn onto my block. It was dead silent out, not even the sound of any distant traffic, just the sound of my shoes hitting the pavement. And then the sound of someone else's shoes hitting the pavement behind me, only it was the sound of someone running as if on their tiptoes, trying to be quiet. By the time I turned around, they stopped. There was a car right behind me, and I almost knew that there was someone hiding behind it. I heard laughing and then a familiar voice saying quietly, "I'm going to kill you." Without even seeing him, I knew it was that man. I looked around, planning out my next move. I couldn't outrun a man, let alone wearing my work shoes. I looked at the nearest house. It had an upstairs light on. Someone was awake. I would go run and ring the doorbell for help. I looked back at the car, and I saw him, that man, peeking his eyes out from behind the car as he inched around it to the front. When he got to the hood, the rest of his face and upper body were exposed, and I could see his disgusting, crazy smile again. I ran for the house, screaming, "Help me." I made it to the front door and rang the bell at least 3 times. That's when the man grabbed me and started choking me, whispering in my ear, "Die." In that moment, I thought my life was flashing before my eyes. Then an angel in the form of a man opened the front door to the house and screamed, "Hey," at the man choking me. The man's grip was released from my neck, and I fell to the floor. I never turned to watch the man run away, but the man from the house helped me up and brought me inside. He gave me water and called the police for me, and I explained the whole story to the police. They collected the CCTV footage of the man from the hotel and put feelers out to track him. I was called into the police station when they did a lineup of people who looked similar to the man on the CCTV footage, and I was asked to point out which man I thought was him. I looked at all 5 of them for like 5 minutes, and I ultimately said it wasn't any of them. I don't know if the pressure and nerves got to me, but in the moment, I truly didn't recognize him to be in that lineup. I hope to this day I didn't make a mistake and let that man roam free. So this happened a little over 2 years ago now. It was 2017, and I had just started a new job at a motel. It was low pay, but I needed an office job. One of my friends, John, got me this job. For a few days, I did training with the owner in the mornings. For 2 nights, John trained me. Our job was the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift, nothing exciting, just checking guests in and doing paperwork. My boss, or the owner, went away with his wife on vacation for a week, which contributed to the swift training I had to endure. So it was my first night alone on the night shift. There was a monitor with security cameras around the motel's property and large glass windows all around the office building with a glass door. There was no night window like most motels have. It was fairly early in the night, at about 1 a.m. I was just doing my normal check-in paperwork when a man walked in and asked if we had any rooms available. Usually, if someone sketchy came in, my boss had me lie and say no. But he seemed normal at the moment, so without hesitation, I said yes. I began creating the reservation on the computer when I noticed he started swatting the air and making spitting noises as if he was being surrounded by flies. I tried to ignore it. As far as I was concerned, it wasn't my business, so I tried to check him into the room as quickly as possible. I gave him his key, and he was on his way. At this point in time, I could be described as very timid. I had a lot going on in my personal life, so I hope you can all understand my reaction to what happens next. The man came back from his room and slammed his hand on the glass door, causing me to jump, absolutely frightened. I looked up to see him just staring at me. He cracked the door and put his head through and said, "I can't get into my room. Why won't you let me into my room?" And my only defense is trying to be helpful, so I replied, "Maybe there's something wrong with your key. Let me give you another one." The look he had in his eyes was inexplicable. I felt like I was in absolute danger. I handed him his new key, and he went back to his room. I tried texting John because he's the one who trained me, though it was the middle of the night and he was asleep. I needed some guidance. With no reply from John, I noticed the man trudging down the stairs to come back. I went into absolute panic mode. I ran into the back office, locked the door, and pulled out my pocket knife. It's important to keep protection when working at night. I heard the man in the office yelling, "Hello? Hello? Why won't you let me into my room? Do you not like me?" Being an absolute idiot and not standing my ground or just calling the police when I was feeling scared, I decided to take the situation on alone. I replied, "I'm just on the phone. I'll be right out." I then started calling John over and over for help. No answer. I decided to take a few breaths and then step out of the office. The man was not there. He was in the bathroom. I started hearing him talking to himself angrily, saying, "Kill her, kill her." My heart sank. Still being an idiot and not calling the police, he came out, and I said, "Your key was broken. I'm sorry. Let me escort you to your room." He agreed. Thankfully, I was wearing a long-sleeved sweater, so with my arms down, I was able to hide my knife in my hand while holding it. I began to walk outside, and he seemed insistent on walking behind me. We began making our way to the staircase and up towards his room. I was sweating from how nervous I was, continuously looking behind me to make sure he wasn't going to make a move. He stopped at a room, and I stopped at his room a few doors down. I smiled and said, "Oh, that's the wrong room. This is your room," as it was clearly said on the door. This whole time, he was going to someone else's room and trying to open the door. After letting him into his room, I quickly ran back to the office and locked the door. I found out there was a lone woman staying in the other room he was trying to get into. The next guest I checked in was a police officer from a few towns over. I felt bad for confiding in him about the guy, but he seemed willing to keep an eye and ear out. The next night, the man came back, but I had the doors locked and told him we were all booked up. I explained to my boss what happened when he got back from vacation. However, he didn't take it very seriously. I continued to work there on the night shift for the next year, where many other strange encounters happened, but this was one of the worst. I used to work as a night clerk in a downtown condominium. The association had a lot of security concerns due to the way the building was constructed back in the late 60s. Both levels of the parking garage were accessible from street level, so there were a lot of possible entry points, many of which were located in blind spots of the security camera system. For that reason, I was required to make 2 rounds around the entire building during my shift to make sure no non-residents had found their way in. The most serious issue we had was the occasional carjacking, but what I encountered most often was homeless people who had found their way into the garage and were huddling in some corner for a bit of shelter. Kicking them back out into the street was by far my least favorite part of the job, but I had to do it. After working there for several months, I knew all the spots that people liked to hide in. The building was very old and had undergone many renovations in its lifetime, which created a lot of nooks and crannies, unnecessary concrete protrusions, sealed-off rooms, and hallways and stairs that led to nowhere. The creepiest spot in the whole building was so weird and potentially dangerous that I took a picture of it and brought it up to management. On the first floor of the garage, there was a door that opened up to a corridor directly underneath the ramp up to the second level of the garage. It was about 3 feet wide and ran about 20 to 30 feet, but it led to literally nowhere. At the end of it was a large water pipe with a valve, which was the only reason the space existed. But in the dark, with just a weak flashlight, that pipe seemed to take on many other forms. What made it dangerous, however, was the lock on the door. There was no padlock or keyhole on either side, but on the outside was a large sliding bolt latch. There was only one way in or out, and it locked from the outside with no way to unlock it from the inside. Ever since I discovered the spot, I couldn't help but imagine how easy it would be for someone to get trapped in there. However, nothing I said to management made any difference. They were already aware of it and had no intention of doing anything about it. Unfortunately, that meant I would have to open the door and check on it every night, but I never stepped foot inside of it. I was way too scared of it. Things went on like that for months, and then one day my worst fear was realized. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning, halfway through my shift. I was doing my rounds in the parking garage, and everything was normal. It was a slow Wednesday night. There hadn't been any problems or suspicious activity on the cameras, so I was far from on edge at the time. But then, in one moment, I was forced to go on alert. I heard the sound of a door slamming across the garage. I wasn't exactly sure where it was, so I walked over to investigate. My heart sank a bit when I saw that the door to the dead-end hallway was wide open. I looked around to see if anyone was in the garage, but I appeared to be alone. I shouted to intimidate anyone if they were hiding somewhere I couldn't see, but I got no response and nobody appeared. I was just worried that there was somebody hiding in the dead-end hallway, so I walked the rest of the way. I shined my flashlight down the hallway, and for a moment, I was relieved to see that nobody was in there. There was, however, an empty glass bottle about 10 feet inside. I sighed and rolled my eyes, thinking that somebody had been drinking in there and had run out in a hurry once they saw me snooping around, accidentally making noise as they rushed. It wouldn't have been that hard for somebody to climb up on the cars parked there to get above the wall and hop the fence into the neighboring parking lot. By the time I got there, since the garage was partially underground in that spot, in fact, that's how a lot of people get in because the dead-end hallway happened to be in a prominent blind spot of the cameras. Unfortunately, I wasn't allowed to leave trash anywhere if I saw it, so I knew I had to pick up that bottle. Of course, I felt the anxiety bubbling up inside my gut just for knowing I had to walk a few steps inside that hallway. I almost didn't do it, but I rationalized myself into thinking there was no way somebody would pop out and lock me in. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, but right as I reached the bottle, the door slammed shut. I immediately ran back to the door, but by the time I got there, it was already locked. I started banging on the door and screaming for help, but there was nobody there. I felt like I was being buried alive, like I could barely breathe. If it weren't for my flashlight, I would have been in some deep trouble. I wouldn't have been able to see a thing. Once I realized I wasn't getting out anytime soon, I reached for my phone. To my utter heartbreak, however, there was no service at all. The walls were made of cinder blocks, the door was made of metal, and the entire 6-story building was on top of me. No matter what I tried, I couldn't call 911. There was absolutely nothing I could do. I was completely stuck. The only way I was getting out was if somebody opened the door from the outside. But it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and it would be hours before anybody left for work. During that time, whoever trapped me was doing whatever they pleased in the parking garage. I heard several car alarms go off, and I knew what was happening. Somehow, they all turned off after a few minutes. I kept banging on the door and shouting, but nobody came. After a while, if I'm being completely honest, I gave up hope that I would be free anytime soon and just focused on staying calm. I sat down against the wall and turned off my flashlight to save the battery, but only after making sure I was completely alone. Every few minutes, I banged on the door a bunch of times. It took me about 2 hours, but finally, I managed to get the attention of somebody going to work early in the morning. I thanked them as they let me out, but unfortunately, the next thing I had to do was call the cops because I quickly noticed that a dozen cars had been broken into. There was broken glass all over the parking lot from all the windows that had been shattered. Whoever it was knew exactly what they were doing. They knew how to trap me in there and how to silence the alarms of the cars they were breaking into. We only had security guards on the weekends, and it left us vulnerable on a seemingly benign Wednesday. All in all, there were tens of thousands of dollars in damages and theft, and I was fired from my job. Not that I would want to go back anyway. The culprit was never identified on the cameras and was never caught. I was working as a waiter at Waffle House, choosing to work the third shift because I had the best hourly pay and brought in pretty good tips due to us being the only 24/7 diner in the entire town. It took me about a year to save up enough money to rent a place in the city and get out of the middle of nowhere, but in that time, I saw quite a few things that still stick with me to this day. By and large, most of the customers I had were truckers and other random people traveling on the interstate through the middle of the night. The town was just a stopover point, not a destination. The so-called locals consisted of farmers and ranchers from the surrounding area, and anyone else like me worked in the fast food and hotel chains clustered around the interstate exit. The final and yet most characteristic residents of that depressing cesspit of a town were the vagrants, hitchhikers, tweakers, and destitute opportunists that had been stranded with us. They could be stuck there from anywhere to a few days to several years, clinging to the parking lots and awnings that were the only meager shelter for dozens of miles in any direction, panhandling for whatever they could until they got lucky enough to get a ride to somewhere else. Really, the only stressful part of my job was dealing with these people. In the beginning, I tried to be empathetic. After all, they are human. However, it didn't take long to end up like my usual coworker, the cook who had been there for 10 years and had seen just about everything. His name was Tony, and the only thing separating him from them was a steady position at the grill. Nobody ever got a chair thrown at them, as far as I know, but Tony was prone to throwing turners and other utensils at anyone who got on his bad side. I usually followed his lead based on his body language. He knew who was trouble and who wasn't. However, even with Tony as a reliable backup, things sometimes got out of hand. There was this one night that I'll never forget. I don't remember what day of the week it was, but all I know was that it had been unusually slow that night. It was around 3 a.m. when this guy walked in, and even I knew something was not right about him. He was wearing soiled clothes and a completely torn-up jacket, covered head to toe in dust, and he was in a completely panicked state of mind. The weird thing was that he said nothing as he ran past us, clutching his right arm to his chest, and immediately locking himself in the bathroom. Tony and I rolled our eyes at the same time, thinking, here we go again. Although I think we both had a feeling this wasn't a regular hobo bathroom emergency or a tweaker looking for a private place to do their thing. That's when I asked Tony, doesn't he kind of look familiar? He brushed it off at first, but then after a short conversation, we realized that he had been inside about 2 hours ago, desperately asking all the customers for rides until eventually, we had to kick him out for being a disturbance. It seemed he obviously hadn't had any luck getting a ride, but something else had happened to him too. I became worried. If that guy needed help, it would be a while before an ambulance could get to him and even longer for them to take him to a hospital. Tony told me to take care of it, so I ran to check on the only customer we had in the store at the time and got them on their way. When I took the bathroom keys and went to check on our stranger in distress, I knocked on the door pretty loud. I asked if everything was okay. There was a pause, then finally a distraught voice answered me, I think I'm really hurt. I just need a ride. Suddenly, I knew something was seriously wrong. The sound of his voice made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I fumbled with the key ring as I told him I was about to open the door. Sir, if you need help, I have to come in there. I shouted. No. The stranger screamed. You have to come get me. I stopped for a second, confused, but then I snapped out of it and shoved the key in the lock. I turned it and opened the door to a terrifying sight. The bathroom was empty, completely empty. No injured man, no blood, no dust, just nothing. It was as clean as it had been since I last cleaned it, as if nobody had been in there at all. In fact, it even looked cleaner than that. What's going on in there? Tony shouted from the kitchen. I was just at a loss. I let the bathroom door close and stepped back. I looked at Tony and told him the truth. There's nobody in there, I said. Don't give me that. Tony shouted. See for yourself. I told him, and he did. He stormed over and barged through the bathroom door. I saw him go blank, just like I did, when he saw the impossible absence of a person. He turned around and looked inside the women's room too, but again, nothing. Nobody in there. In raw disbelief, we gathered ourselves behind the counter. We interrogated each other uselessly, thinking one of us must have let him slip by unnoticed. However, we both knew we had been on high alert since the second he came in. There was no way either of us would have missed him leaving within a fraction of a second. Our conversation ended abruptly when we both saw the same thing out of the corner of our eyes. The stranger was somehow outside, looking at us through the window. He still had his right arm stuffed out of sight, but now, as we got a better view of his face, we saw that wasn't his only problem. His face was bloody, like he'd been hit with a brick. His nose was broken, his lip was split and missing a piece, showing us his cracked and missing teeth. One of his eyes seemed completely swollen over, but the one that was open was gushing blood. Tony and I didn't move a muscle. We didn't even breathe for a second. After a few horrible seconds of realizing what was happening, I finally thought to call 911. But as soon as the idea occurred to me, the man started to move. He turned to the side and started to limp across the big front window. We watched him in silence as he made it all the way to the corner of the window, where it wrapped around to the other side. "What the hell?" I whispered, only for Tony to quickly shush me. It was at that moment I saw he had gone pale and wide-eyed, which only terrified me even more. Something about this man had gotten through Tony's defenses, and that meant we were not prepared. Before we could say anything else, we heard a crash from the back room. We both ran inside and searched for the source of the noise. It was coming from the walk-in freezer. Somebody was tearing things up and freaking out. Tony ran up there and threw open the door, and there he was, the guy. He had ripped open a box of burger patties and was clutching a handful of meat, pressing it to his right arm like an ice pack. When he saw us, he froze. The patties dropped from his hand and revealed the condition of his arm. His hand was stuck in a thumbs-up position, but his wrist had been snapped clean off, and his hand was dangling from the rest of his arm by a thread of skin. After a terrifying moment of deer-in-headlight stares, the stranger bolted from the freezer, crashing through both me and Tony. He sprinted outside, screaming, before we had a chance to react. I stumbled to my feet as Tony ran out to the dining area, locked the front doors, and switched off all the lights. Then he pushed me back into the back room and started yelling at me. "How could you leave the back door unlocked?" he yelled. "No, look. It's still locked." I pointed to the back door, and sure enough, it was locked now. Absolutely nothing was making sense, but we gave up on trying to decipher it for the rest of the night until the sun came up and the morning crew came in. We kept the doors locked and stayed out of sight. When we were finally freed from our nightmare of a shift and set out into the world, we noticed the train of police and paramedics on the freeway right outside of town. We asked around only to find out that a man had been killed in a hit-and-run right there at the off-ramp not even 1,000 feet from the Waffle House. He died sometime after midnight, but his body lay on the shoulder undiscovered until daylight. His corpse was mangled, but his thumb was still sticking straight up from trying to hitch a ride. Of course, by the afternoon, they had scraped him off the pavement and washed away his blood until the spot where he died was cleaner than I'd ever seen it. My name is Maury. I'm from the USA. Years ago, I worked in a home for older people as a nurse. I had the night shift. We were together drinking coffee on the second floor. All of a sudden, we heard a loud bang, so we thought a client had fallen. We decided that I would take the second floor and my colleague would take the first. Maybe we could find out what happened. While my colleague walked down the stairs, I looked at the monitor, which was on the second floor, and I saw someone in the department on the ground floor. He was inside the closed apartment. You could walk in over there, but you needed a code to get out. People with dementia lived there. We watched for a while, and the guy was stuck, he couldn't get out. We decided to go inside a room on the second floor of one of our clients because you needed a special key to go inside. We thought that was safer. We explained to her what was going on. She was perfectly capable of understanding the situation, and of course, we called 112. I explained the situation, and they told me they would come right away. I called my husband, who also had the night shift as a security guard in another town not too far away from us. He was just talking with the cops while I called 112 and said they were on their way. When I hung up, I looked outside and saw that guy climbing out the window. So I called back. They asked if something had changed. The police arrived, and we did a walk with them throughout the whole building. The guy broke the door in the kitchen. His stuff to break the door was there on the ground. The police couldn't really do much. I don't even know if they found the guy. Later that day, we heard that they were riding around the building 2 hours before the guy went in, and the guy had walked all over the ground floor, all while we were having our coffee on the second floor. That's a pretty scary thought. The next day, I had one more night shift. Though I don't have that much to fear, it was still pretty scary. So I asked if I could bring my 2 dogs. We had 2 golden at the time, and they were actually okay with that. So I brought them with me the next night. Nothing happened. The dogs walked with me the whole night, and of course, I let them outside now and then to do their thing. The other night, 2 other colleagues had the night shift, and guess what? They came back. They had robbed the safe. I always thought that the guy we had was just looking around to see if he could get away, but they had planned to come back for the safe the next night. But I'm guessing the 2 golden scared them off. I wouldn't go inside if there were 2 dogs like that either if I didn't know them. Later on, I always brought my dogs if I ever did the night shift over there. Most colleagues would be happy if they worked with me because they felt safe with the dogs, and so did I. The funny thing was that the dogs knew the route we always walked. After a few times, I didn't even put their leash on, they just knew. If we needed to help a client, they just waited in the hallway until I was done. A few clients knew it because I told them, knowing that they loved dogs. So when they needed our help, the dogs went with us in their apartment. Both the dogs and clients loved that.